Hello there, this is Martin Q. Just decided to throw my hat into the ring. I've seen, I think it's the Actman's Politics in Video Games. I'm sure there's been plenty of others before and many other notable people. And I'm in this weird spot where, of course, you want to see what your peers are saying, but at the same time, by watching other videos that you know concern the topic, you kind of you might bias yourself. You end up repeating the same talking points. So, in a way, I almost want to avoid that so that anybody else who is watching numerous videos about politics, pop culture, and stuff like that can see that these are points of convergence. Where like, this is where you would your analysis of the subject would lead without an echo chamber of people saying like, oh well, this other big influencer in my network who is saying this thing, and I should probably say that because look at all the support they're getting and all of that. Obvious. I'm not in the innermost ring. Clearly, I'm not making a living off of this, but I just know that that is what's going around, and so for future posterity, just to see that a lot of people feel this way. This is my analysis of pop culture and politics, which I think might be setting the scale a little too large. So hopefully I don't get bogged down in each subject. Uh, but I feel like it's a nice idea to make it so comprehensive that people are inevitably going to try to say, oh, well, my favorite fandom, it's different because this unique thing. And no, 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 no. You've picked the one instance where the writer was political or intended for this sort of message or whatnot. So I'm casting a wide net so that you can see that there is at least a little bit in just about everything. I'm going to be going down this list to clearly, this is how professional I am. Just got it typed out in freaking notepad. And um, hopefully, this is a little bit more organized than some of my other stream of consciousness. It still will be that. And this is not like some pre recorded or pre rehearsed uh, a speech I'm going to spew out. But hopefully, this allows you to get an idea of where I'm going. And if there, obviously, because it's pop culture, if there are any spoilers that people are concerned about, I'm going to, once I start talking about that, I will highlight the fandom or specific series that I will be delving into more detail if I feel it needs that sort of context. But for the most part, I'm hoping I can talk about general things, right? Because getting too stuck in specifics is exactly the sort of like, well, actually, it's not political, or actually, this was the right thing to do because some writing trope, right? So, all right, without further ado, so yeah, politics, art, culture in general, I think most people have an understanding of how we enjoy things, pop culture. It's just a fun thing. My understanding, from what I'd heard about things like sports, as probably the biggest example, is something is an activity that arises because obviously people want to have fun, but also it gets some of your aggression out, like a sense of competitiveness, and it allows you to do that in a safer environment where obviously people are not actually murdering each other for the most part. Uh, so yeah, I think there's some competitiveness in moderation that games, pop culture lets you live out these sorts of stories, right? Storytelling as well, all combines into pop culture, which is at any given moment somebody can refer to a thing, and it's like the water cooler talks at work. Is that you have a pretty good sense that if you bring up that subject matter, everybody will know what you're talking about. Did you see the last episode of The Walking Dead? Blah 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 blah, and that is a connecting point for people. That people will know what you're talking about, and that's why it's important because pop culture then allows ideas that are spread within a story to spread among the populace, things that you might not get away with referring to if you took a literal current event and then try to discuss it because people are close to the topic, they might have like an emotional attachment. Obviously, it happens with pop culture too, but as soon as you substitute real person for a fictional stand-in, there are people who are able to take a step back and see that I can see where that's coming from. Probably most relevant with I think with the Last of Us season going out as of this recording. Like I'm not going to get into that just yet. So yeah, pop culture, politics, art, all that. You just that's how the storytelling goes. Video games causing violence. This is an old one, but people will bring up things like books on subject matter like violence or sex. That means that depravity is spreading throughout culture. So yeah, books. You got music concerts, the Beatles. Um, Anybody making like women in the crowd throw their panties on stage. It's always about another step towards the destruction of the family unit or something. Video games, D&D, they always find a scapegoat. And I think there's some like correlation versus causation, but that's another pop culture stance that people think that if you just got rid of that one thing, it would solve the problem. I live in the United States, so I mean the violence. There are multiple other things happening, but that is another thing that happens with pop culture. Science versus art. We're dealing with a lot of that. So of course you have the scientific interest STEM, and they tend to go into industry that is very profitable. And living in the southern U.S., yeah, you get a you are pressured into as anyone can see, I'm an Asian person. You're pressured into positions like engineering and stuff that are perceived as more productive because they have a practical, real world application versus something like the arts, liberal humanities, and stuff, which are seen as some sort of like sissy imaginary thing. And of course, they're both important. And we see what happens when science is done with no care for ethics. And of course, the arts also involves writers, people who make pop culture, which is them looking at current events and everything else that's going on. And again, they spread those ideas throughout the population. So that will come up later once we get talking about how the stories are written, because some of the artists will believe in different things and they get to put those ideas into the story. So those are this is some of the conflicts within like who decides or which parts of the population do different things. And of course, the scientists can create their own stories as well. It's just that the artists are the ones who do a lot of pop culture. They create the art, even though you will get stories out of scientists who collaborate with them, and by them making the technology that creates the conversations that you have uh, about like something like Black Mirror or whatnot. Uh, so this is the story writers, the writer's imagination, universe creation, strawman arguments. So of course, when a writer, when an artist wants to make a story, uh, I'm speaking as somebody who's not published something, but I mean, as a consumer, not to make myself. Of course, consumers can have flawed interpretations of what goes into writing a story too. So that's a disclaimer. But my understanding of when you're writing for a world, even for something as approachable as coming up with a D&D universe that any given person could then go and run for a group, you are creating that universe essentially. And depending on how literal you take it with the real world, or if you start from scratch with something completely fictional, uh, you get to decide what parts of reality to bring in. And again, it'll keep coming up. Um, you get to decide what is status quo in those stories because you can come up with a universe where you use our existence as a baseline and you say these are the problems that humanity has. And if you add little twists depending on the fiction, if it's something like My Hero Academia, superpowers, right? There are uh, numerous fictional universes where some writers have put more or less work into imagining, like at this stage, what would have gone differently? How would people respond? Um, if you arrive at a certain amount of history past the event or something, whatever unique thing happens, you're supposed to, as a writer, imagine, um, yeah, would it look the same as our world? What kind of problems are you going to bring up? Obviously, the story having some sort of conflict to drive a story forward. Uh, those conflicts will be usually based on something in the real world, and so uh, you will. I bring in the strawmans because one of my favorites is bandits, raiders, and stuff. That a lot of fictional worlds will just have the exist, and they're just supposed to be punching bags for the protagonists. They are just evil. D&D has this. I think they had this drama a couple years back as well about the races that are inherently evil. Some of that being outdated because you could easily just substitute that for various ethnicities or and whatnot. Like it's a monster versus no, this is somebody that you can talk to and they're intelligent enough to make a decision, and it is based on all of the circumstances of their experiences and how they were raised, and that's how an intelligent species becomes an opponent or something. Um, so again, not mentioning anything too specific. It's just those are the things that go into writing before a writer just says, "Yeah, these are the bad guys, and you've got to kill them, and that's the right thing to do." There's no redeeming them, and they're always just going to be there, and there's nothing you can do about it. I always poke fun at the bandit situation where it's like, yeah, were there good social policies? Are the people poor and desperate? Did they just want to cause violence and destruction one day? Sometimes the writers just don't ask, like and they don't tell the readers, the viewers of the story, just like how did you get here? It's just you're just meant to accept. Oh yeah, that's what you do, and that's without even getting into things like magic systems, science fiction, where do you have scarcity issues, but you have matter creation or transmutation in your world. So if you can just do that with magic or science, then is there a housing shortage? Is there food shortages? Logistical problems in the real world? We don't have magic or sufficiently advanced science just yet, so we can get into things like, and we still should take better care of human rights, housing, food, and water and stuff like that. Those are things we can accomplish by addressing wealth inequality. So when a story is written and with magic and science, they still, through the power of the human imagination, somehow still have the problems and there's nothing they can do about it. That's what I bring up. Again, you can take this and apply it to whichever story pop culture you're thinking of. And that's what I'll be getting into later on here. So yeah, then coming of age, finding purpose, supporting your lifestyle. Depending on when you absorb the pop culture, of course, you have more free time. Hopefully, when you're a child, and that's part of your nature versus nurture. You're being raised on the ideas of right and wrong. Your audience should hopefully be internalizing some of these stories, even the most basic children's show sort of things about like sharing and caring. The storylines where a character is selfish and they hurt a bunch of their friends and they come to realize that those are important for raising a generation of people that aren't sociopaths. And then they take those ideas into the real world. Obviously, as somebody grows up, the pop culture that they consume gets more and more complex, hopefully. But those are the kinds of stories that people can mirror, and you can write stories about coming of age as well, and those could be about you realizing, the way things are, the way they need to change, and yeah, that's just an importance of pop culture. So, yes, third places for socializing, and all of this. So, yeah, depending on where you live, you can have far more or less of these that are disappearing. The concept of third places, I believe, off the top of my head, is a location that is not home or work. That's why it's called the third place. You don't just go back and forth, and that's your entire existence. Otherwise, that's some sort of horrific work camp thing. But supposedly, in a better society, I am from the U.S., where we're told we're better than this. But yeah, you would have a public area that where you're not expected to pay money just to exist, hopefully, and you have the leisure, the time and energy to be with people, share ideas, and hopefully fulfill your social needs, and connect with your community better. So that can be anything, but of course, that can a lot of times that leads to pop culture, the ability to talk about the things that you're interested in, your hobbies, right? And that is where you will share your experiences, and if it's like a book club, uh, then people can come to some sort of agreement on like how a story's going, and that ties into some of the current events, or current issues, I guess, right? Where under capitalism, everybody's getting alienated, time, money, energy, the resources that they want to extract from you. Then, yeah, we're dealing with the burnout of a large portion of the population, myself included, trying to just get through jobs and then wondering, like, when am I supposed to just hang out with people and not feel like I'm bothering them because either they're working or they're tired from working and they're just trying to run their errands. You always feel like you'd be imposing on somebody, like, hey, just give me your phone number. I don't want to come across as a creep. This is a lot of talk that some of which is echoed in the incel communities, and yeah, a lot of inexcusable behavior, some unrealistic expectations about relationships that could hopefully have been in a healthier society would not be there, would not have created these circumstances where people, yeah, are undergoing existential crises. They don't, right? If you don't feel like you can love yourself, can you love others? Do you have the energy, the social battery to expend on other people without making unrealistic, sudden demands, and that desperation comes across and makes you even less appealing as a partner, which creates a positive feedback loop and makes things worse. So I mean, yeah, that happens. Romance porn, that is the unrealistic side, and people craving those connections. And then when you don't get that, you tend to hide away in your escapism. Again, I'm guilty here, but self-awareness helps. Um, and that's why I'm so obsessed with pop culture and why this is so important, because you will still see the same things in the stories. 40-Year-Old Virgin is a specific example. I thought was a funny one to start bringing things in. Obviously, as the title says, check it out. But I guess I might get into some spoilers if you're if, but yeah, just the idea that somebody can grow old and you're considered a loser. You're considered a loser if you make it to a certain age and you haven't had such an intimate connection with people. There's a lot of discussion over casual relationships and just the act of having sex. I'm not about to do a full psychological breakdown of that, but the idea is still just being considered a success or not in this pop culture movie. Just a guy who is obsessed with hobbies and random circumstances uh, could not uh, proceed past that stage at the age of 40. And I'm sure there's statistics on the average age of like first relationship, losing virginity and stuff like that. We're not gonna get into that, uh, but that is one. And yeah, you hide away. You can hide away in your pop culture, and life might pass you by. That's just yeah. So Steam sale library burnout, more pop culture tied into the gaming sphere. Um, so obviously you have some resources available to absorb pop culture, and you just feel like you're interested in stuff you buy, you consume materialism, um, but you're never really sure. You burn out. You start seeing all these options, and you don't know if you get the same joy from things. Some of that's just depression, but you just you don't feel the same attachment to things that you used to enjoy anymore. Pop culture probably rely on a few standbys, the reliable games. Um, that's just materialism, some pop culture there. But yeah, you just eventually your resources are incredibly important. What kind of pop culture that you have access to, but eventually, um, eventually it is more just about this kind of experiences that you want, the stories that you're looking for. Um, yeah, I don't know. I forget exactly how I composed these lists. This list just whenever a thought crossed my mind about how it tied in, but but yeah, that's pop culture, and this is just more how you accumulate some some of that pop culture. Whether it's a Steam sale, it's your video games, you get movies on sale, you just rent or buy them, um, and you're just hoping for an experience to take your mind off of things. But I think there is a dissatisfaction with a lot of pop culture. We'll get into that. The big one is Arcane, right? But I'll get into the specifics of why I feel that is eventually. Um, so skill versus luck. This is a huge one, and so if it hasn't been incredibly apparent by now, I lean decently left in the for the United States, which is the biggest asterisk disclaimer ever. Anybody who's viewing me from a different country with better politics and a healthier Overton window uh, could probably contest some of my ideas. But yeah, so all of this, your worldview on human rights and right and wrong, and optimism versus pessimism about the future and whether things can be better, goes into your political views and how you interpret games, pop culture, all that stuff. And skill versus luck is a huge one because obviously in video games, but the stories about that uh, spread throughout all sorts of pop culture. So the idea of skill versus luck, right? If you is that I believe, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a leftist view on whether or not your circumstances matter more for determining the outcome of your life and the things that you do and you attempt to do, right? Versus skill, where you do put effort into things and it does matter, of course, it does. But just expecting somebody to overcome all of the disadvantages of life and their random circumstances is was unrealistic, to put it kindly. So I mean, yeah, I could just give examples about like rigged games, or how much of a disadvantage or should somebody be expected to overcome, but with just hard work. There are numerous games that are based on random chance that I feel gamers should be very aware of this, but clearly there is a right wing. Uh, there's right wing almost everywhere, but it's especially annoying in the gaming community because of how not self-aware they are. Um, so yeah, let's get into that. So blood innate, given versus earned. Yeah, there's a lot of propaganda regarding self-determination, and again, the if you just work hard, then everything will work out because that's the most important thing, and it is important. Just Uh, there are people who are not aware of themselves or others, what resources they have been given versus what has been earned. And there's a usually some personal bias that anything that somebody has, they earned it and they were not given that. And so you have to be aware of your own privilege. About like, yes, you did work hard from where you are, but you started where you are because the circumstances of your birth, which you had no control over, right? You didn't exist before mom or dad or whatever test tube uh, fertilization, you had cloning, right? Like you did not exist. You did not get to choose your parents, how wealthy they are, their status, their jobs, and any unique genetic traits they had, better or worse, right? Like my vision and or something. It's just that's something that you're born with, and you have to learn to overcome. And so there is a certain degree of what you can do about that. Um, and there are plenty of pop culture stories about yeah, like overcoming circumstances and some of the criticisms of them where the message seems to be about, oh, it doesn't matter who you were when you're born, you can achieve anything. And the reason why people criticize them later is when you look on the story in hindsight, where it's like, oh no, the main character is only able to do this because of some crazy eugenics or some secret technique that only they know. It's like, well, when you introduce that, you are literally telling people that's like a chosen one story that, oh well, they're special, so therefore they can just do that thing because another person in the story doing at least as much hard work, if not more hard work, they, by that logic, should have succeeded even more, but they don't. So that's when the stories and the dissatisfaction with pop culture rises when people see the inconsistencies of a story that they were led to believe uh, would be uplifting in a different sense. And again, I understand the importance of uplifting, providing some inspiration, but then the stories get a little unrealistic by creating a perfect world where, oh yeah, none of these other things matter. Um, I feel that's where the pessimism rolls over into optimism. I feel because personally, right, I'm pessimistic about things. Like I want my stories to acknowledge the reality of the situation that this is how bad things are. And once I see that people know that, and they can at least, you can't fix the problem if you don't even know it exists, right? That comforts me to then be more optimistic about the rest of the story or the pop culture that I'm absorbing because like, okay, we agree on that reality then. Um, that's just that's an explanation that's continuing the subject and that is a little more insight into me and you'll see why once we get into more of the specifics. But yeah, if you've ever felt something similar, that's I'm basically trying to verbalize where that comes from. So yeah, multiple chances, Undertale, pop culture. Of course, when you absorb it, it's a story. It's pre-made, and there's usually only the one way it goes down because somebody already wrote the story. That gets back into the writer creating the universe. You can make the story go as perfectly as you want from start to finish in a perfect sequence of events because oh yeah, through coincidence that this thing happens. It's all the Deus Ex Machinas chained together, and you see that in video games as well. You get the protagonist syndrome. I'll get into that a little later, but yeah, games having like a save system where you can just save scum and you have multiple attempts at things. Obviously, in the real world, that's a joke we have all the time. That you don't get to, you can learn from and you can try to address similar situations when you encounter them in the future. But for the most part, like, yeah, there are a lot of one-off circumstances. You only get to try one time, and if it messes up, that's it. And obviously, things like death is even huger in a story, like how reckless you are. Because if you fail in the real world, you die, and until we science or magic a way to bring people back from the dead, uh, yeah, the consequences are dire. So this is a point that I wanted to bring up with pop culture as people interpreting like how a character acts or what people should have, could have, would have done, it's a lot easier to take risks in your pop culture and your hobbies and stuff when the stakes are lower, because you know if you fail you can just try again. This is literally why things are people take should take those aspects of life so seriously. You can take as many risks as you want with a video game, because if you die or you fail, oh well, I wasted like a couple minutes maybe. And people already have issues with games like Dark Souls and whatnot, where there are hardcore games where you have the potential to lose more of your progress. Things that are like an hour, half an hour set you back, and that's controversial in its own way. So yeah, just imagine how important pop culture and politics is when in the real world people trying to survive and their lives at stake, to some degree. So yeah, that is an aspect of skill versus luck. Just it's when people say things like, "Oh, you just need to take more risks in life." That's what I think about, because when somebody takes a risk and it doesn't work out, uh, what do you do for them? Because people just take these success cases and say like, see, you should have been like that guy. Okay, and if they took the risk and they failed, are you then going to help them, or are you gonna just say, too bad, they should have known better? So you would have told them they should take a risk. So yeah, that is a key thing in pop culture I'll get into. Means testing and proving yourself. Yeah, so plenty in pop culture. They kind of get the first and second steps mixed around. Unfortunately, there's a lot of propaganda about whether or not people deserve things, right, versus human rights. So, of course, the circumstances of your birth, right, the ability for you to know things, to do things, you have some capabilities, but this is the problem with asking for help or receiving any sort of assistance. And certainly there are problems with nepotism and where you people help the rich or some people who are already incredibly capable, but other people see that as like, oh well, they've already proven themselves, and those are the ones who deserve more assistance. And some sometimes that makes sense, but other times it's like, so you only provide help to the people who are already capable and don't need the help. That just kind of concentrates wealth to the top of a pyramid. You would think that the people who aren't doing well need the most, but that usually gets countered with something like, oh, well, if people just know they're going to receive help if they do badly, then they'll just be lazy on purpose. And I believe that those are edge cases. I'm sure people will provide some statistics on that, but yeah, this one has always been weird. The example I love to use for this one is if anybody's played RPGs and you have a group of characters and a wide roster, and they have any sort of progression, you'll notice with like leveling up or whatever, if that means the character gets significantly stronger, then the simplest mechanic immediately tells you how this works. As soon as somebody in an RPG where your characters have different levels, as soon as one person gets a little bit stronger, and the RPG is reliant on getting the kill or being the one to do something, accomplish a great task the most, if becoming stronger means you're immediately more capable, then you're more likely to succeed, and then more of the experience, more of the prestige concentrates on that person. So then by the next encounter, they're more likely to get kills or they're more likely to accomplish great deeds. So more strength to them. And you'll quickly see an RPG party where like there's this one person in the lead who gets all of the experience and everybody else is weaker. They might die before the fight ends and therefore not get XP. They're doing less damage, so they're less likely to get kills, so less XP, right? It just unless the game has some sort of auto balancing where you don't get as much experience if you're that many levels ahead, or fights that aren't a challenge anymore for that character, right? Then you're directly seeing what power and wealth consolidation does, where people fall behind, and from an outside perspective, you might just say like, oh well, clearly nobody else earns it. It's like, well, they're all part of the same group. They just aren't powerful at that stage just because of random chance. Whoever landed the last hit to become more powerful, whoever gets at higher level first, can keep pushing that advantage. So that's the example I like to use. That gamers should be able to see, and it pops up. It's a little less visible in a lot of other non-interactive stories because they're uh, they have to spell out the circumstances versus a gamer who will see this same pattern pop up over and over and over across a longer experience. And again, the pop culture aspect of video games is that it is interactive, which I feel gives a more unique way of digesting it, which I'm probably will get into a little later because of the ability of an audience to distance themselves from a story versus an interactive game. I'm probably going to get into that with The Last of Us, some lower on this list, because the TV show versus the game is probably going. I'm sure there are discussions on this right now about your ability to empathize with characters because you're literally put in their shoes to see their perspective versus being told and just watching it happen as if it's another person because that is not you. You're just watching it. That sort of thing. Uh, so yeah, some of this politics comes down to suffering equals character building. There are people who hold this view in real life, and while I agree suffering is an opportunity to learn and to build character, this logic has never really made sense to me as like the primary way to build character, to be a better person. Because by that logic, then why do if it results in more good, then all of society would be have no motivation for making things better. Because actually you want to make things worse because it makes the people better and stronger, which doesn't make any sense. You would create some sort of downward spiral of suffering. Why, if you do anything nice for somebody, you're avoiding suffering and character growth that they could go through. That doesn't make any sense. You would just constantly be backstabbing each other. I'm giving you help. I'm giving you help. It's an opportunity to grow. Clearly, we don't. Most people do not think that is a natural progression because we see people be kind. The reason why we have loved ones to show love instead of like giving each other more opportunities to grow through suffering. But like, there are people who do that. It's terrible. You're supposed to learn with as little suffering as possible. But I do. This is the caveat to this is of course that there are people um, who have issues with empathy, and right, this is where the discussion of things like everybody should work a customer service job or some other entry level position at least once, right? And I get that. I've worked entry level jobs, customer service, in the misery. Uh, oh, the misery. Um, and but in my case, right, because of my upbringing, some of the pop culture, I don't know, the random circumstances of I didn't need to work an entry level job, but by the time I was like in middle school, high school, to not want to do horrible things to each other, to other people, to when I saw, my parents interacting with waiting staff, servers at restaurants and stuff, right? It helps a certain type of person who never had dealt with that or has trouble visualizing and imagining the situation. But it should not be mandatory for everything. Um, yeah, just I feel like we can just still be good, and it just requires a type of mind to imagine how to better themselves without needing to subject anyone to that. Um, so yeah, then therapy, mindfulness, manifesting goes into just hard work and uh, your mindset, which again these are important. It does not overcome every other problem. I feel like just putting your mind to it or really trying hard, like that's gonna fix the problem. Um, it's like I don't know what you'd be like telling somebody, oh well, if you jump off a cliff, if you just flap your wings harder, if you just really believed and you concentrate on it, that's when you'll just fly. It's like, no, that's not going to change the reality. You would have to design a flight suit or something, just design a plane. You actually address some of the material limitations and not just put your faith in belief and stuff, which I know is silly coming from somebody who loves Gurren Lagann, which I'll get into later. Um, but that's, you can like it for different reasons, and I still acknowledge its flaws. But yeah, there. That's why, like, again, therapy. Not saying anything against therapy either, but without addressing reality, a lot of it just comes down to telling somebody to lift themselves up by their bootstraps, which is insulting. And I think what like Brennan Lee Mulligan did a great video with Wired recently about D&D, and yeah, he pointed out one of his favorite tropes, which I'm hoping. I mean, so many. It's like in the millions of views now. Like, though you hope that those people internalize criticisms of like Harry Potter and stuff. I don't know if it's a. Maybe I'll get into it later, but just that, yeah, you just saying that if you try hard enough, then you will succeed. Then by that logic, that implies anybody else who failed didn't believe, they didn't try at all, which is like an insult to everybody else um, that didn't succeed. It implies that nobody else is capable, which is indicates a negative view of humanity as a whole, which I think I get into it later. Yeah, with nature nurture, possibly, or maybe with like main character syndrome and NPCs. Yeah, so down here, so I'll probably get into that later. But yeah, the implication that nobody else is capable is a harmful one for society. Skill luck, Squid Game, I guess, is a good specific example, and I'm sure a lot of people. This was a water cooler series for a lot of people in the U.S. K dramas, but quite literally, it's just capitalism. Word of the author, obviously, those can be flawed, but yeah, putting in the show elements of chance, hard work versus lies about a fair chance and equitable uh, status. Just by offering the chance, you should be grateful. Whether or not you can criticize an unfair system versus only looking at the behavior of individuals within it. I mean, yeah, there are plenty of videos already about like Squid Game's actually about communism and stuff because capitalism is the only way. So I mean, yeah, there are still people who fight over the politics in that one, but skill versus luck, it's in the series already about some people trying to use their innate talents or the things that they learned, and that's an unfair advantage over others. As long as you're placed in a competitive environment, then working together looks stupid. Why would you ever help somebody that you're competing against? Which is this is some degree of competition is good for driving people forward, but you can see it where things becoming a competition uh, that incentivizes people to start doing more predatory things. And those are the behaviors that people will then turn around and say, oh, well, that's just human nature, um, that people are bad. No, because you're incentivizing them. And they're just trying to survive, and you made it so that the way they get ahead is by backstabbing. So you don't get to be surprised when people backstab, and it's actually a testament to humanity that a number of people still did not backstab, right? So, I mean, that's just a specific, but yeah, gamer skill, community journalism. I think some of this is like Gamergate or whatnot, and a lot of the journalism difficulty jokes. I enjoy some of those too. Yeah, you poke fun at people who seem incompetent uh, for what they're doing, and really this ties into the community because the alienation people have because of capitalism, politics, that people hide away in their escapism and they take some sort of pride in their hobby and the tight knit community of other skilled people that share that interest, it becomes an attack on them when somebody is bad at games or says or criticizes. So I mean, that's where some of that identity comes from. Like you must be a gamer, um, because that's just how you because that is the outlet, right? I think a lot of people would use the example of like whether you're able to you were born too late to explore the world, too but born too early to explore outer space or something, right? So I think that there's beliefs about what kind of things that a person should accomplish or what kind of it's the what the exploration or um, into the unknown or achieving a claim by claiming new lands or something, and just that we're not able to do that, so we're stuck with the virtual worlds. Um, so I mean, I guess I'm just trying to explain some of the fierce attachment there, but it clearly goes toxic because again because people don't really have other outlets for socializing and feelings of accomplishment and satisfaction, right? The burnout, it all just ties together because people need such a violent expression of like, no, I need to know that my time and interest and my efforts were worth something, and if I can't even get that from gaming as like a respected hobby or the skills and knowledge, like why did I memorize all of these tactics and these statistics if it doesn't help me in the real world? And yeah, it just ties back into your expressions of competence and all that. Just seeking validation and respect, which yeah, I wish people could get from more sources. So nature, nurture, humanity. As I started to bring up before, some beliefs about like, oh, if humanity is inherently good, we have the capacity for bad, and depending on the system that they are are placed in, were brought up in, they are incentivized to work together, backstab more or less in certain contexts. I think an example people use is something like you don't put a starving person in a room full of food and get angry at them that they steal the food or something. They're just trying to take care of themselves, and you're just trying to see what you want to see, I guess. So, uh, yeah, I mean, what else is there to get into with that? There's people who are brought up on fearing people. That, oh, everybody else who isn't part of my close knit group of friends and family, they're all criminals, rapists, drug dealers. Yeah. So how do you get past that fear, that paranoia about society and the unknown, the other people? There's good uh, this specific example of alternate history books. Harry Turtledove, I remember reading those a lot more when I was in high school, and a little bit get back to like universe creation, just sci-fi. So spoiler-ish um, about like yeah, if sci-fi aliens dropped down during World War II, how would the World War have gone differently? Would humanity band together to fight a common enemy? That's been explored several times, but uh, the World War II setting allows the writer to get into like the Nazis and like, well, if they helped us out here, that must mean they're our allies now. Or do you give them better consideration, or does that thing does not balance out the other thing? It's yeah. I unfortunately I don't think I finished it, and I'm not doing a super deep dive on it, nor do I think I could. Just that is an example, and obviously we've seen other examples since. Civilization is a fun one that I like to use. The gaming community loves Civilization on some level. It's in plenty of the memes about how addictive it is, but because it's a simulation of real world countries, it has a much closer tie to how people view the world, because you could literally just play as your favorite country and say, and it's right for me to conquer everything because I'm just going to make it a better place, which is what every empire says ever. And this is where you can get into gaming as a limitation, because I think there have been some criticisms of Civilization in that it's a simulation of the world, but it's gamified in that there needs to be an end goal. And what are you supposed to do? You win. How does a country win at being a country? And you just that's where you have the numerous win conditions, which some of that is good. It's at least there's alternates other than like war, kill everybody else, and stuff like that. But that does is based on the idea that a country just has to accumulate the most points at something, and if they do that, they are a winner, and anybody else who didn't do that, they are a loser, which is a little one track. I think the proper term for that is it like zero sum, a zero sum game? Is a criticism of real world politics, where there are people who believe you cannot have a good thing without a bad thing happening somewhere else. Like net zero sum, it has to equal out. Whereas in reality, like no, you could just do good things. You don't need to take things away to bring about something good, for the most part. And so, yeah, there are people who've literally said that about and and games like Civilization on some level will create that when you are literally competing for points, and you can use your civilization to stomp out uh the lessers and stuff, and right, like it can be used for good, education and all that. But yeah, there are people who play plenty of Empire 4X strategy games, and it fulfills a need to conquer and subjugate others. Right? It's a tool, but that is an example I like to use, like the point system. Like in the real world, you just want to be prosperous. You want to take care of your citizens, right? On some level, I'm sure leaders are tallying the points. That's just how they analyze potential threats and allies and all that. But the idea that somebody will just win one day, enough time has passed, that's the end of the game. Um, Idiocracy is a big one that comes up, and yes, obviously it has its flaws with like IQ and any kind of belief in eugenics, that people will just naturally be stupid over time. Um, and obviously you can still just have fun with it. It's a funny movie, but this one comes up all the time because people say yes, it's becoming more of a documentary than a comedy and stuff. And so, sure, problematic in that you can just set aside the idea that people will just become stupid. I I my head canon was always that okay, well, it doesn't have to literally be about people becoming stupid, just that if society never changed, and they only, I think it's addressed in the movie too, where they only value certain traits, that a type of intelligence, anti what anti-intellectualism, belief in the academics being elite, and all that, without addressing like corruption and stuff like that, then over hundreds or thousands of years, you would end up with a society that could be like an idiocracy, where I'm sure there are intelligent people, they were just never raised like that, or it was always suppressed. So sure, this is where we I guess some of the arguments might be about like, oh well, the smart people would have surely stopped this from happening, but I mean, this is where you get into the pessimism about the real world, where what good can the educated and the smart people do when your society is incentivized to hand power a to the greedy, the corrupt, and the misinformed, the uneducated. Like not to make them seem lesser, just literally uneducated, as in like if you think you know how the world works and you don't, and we're seeing it play out in real time, where people are like, so is anybody going to stop what's going on, us 2025, that stuff? So I mean, that's the reason why there a level of pessimism takes root, and yeah, people see like, oh well, yeah, it's just a documentary, because clearly that's just going to keep happening until actual change um, happens, and it could just still be a very negative change. Um, I don't know. I'm getting rambly on it, but I guess that was always destined to happen. Um, Laws and religion are a pretty big one. Whoa, Martin Q gonna get into religion on a YouTube video, whatever. Like, I think it's so. Disclaimer at the start is that obviously laws, religion. It's good to set rules, and it's good to believe in something. I think that's as close to like spirituality as I get. Not to be like edgy atheist, just no. I think it's good to believe. Um, that being said, I think you also, as I've said before, need to acknowledge reality, and I think this is where these are tied in that, again, as we are seeing right now, just because something is a law, legal, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And just because something is law and legal doesn't mean that it does anything unless it's enforced. And then there's a huge discussion to be had about laws as like a deterrent, and using it as like a guideline. And yeah, it's a complicated issue. About like, well, if yeah, if people were people naturally do good things, but you do have to have a law to set like a the guideline that you sort of follow, and like a what is it? People say it's like speed limits, or it's like if you pass the speed limit number, criminal and stuff like that, as opposed to like, oh well, the speed limit's actually there so that people see and they go like 5 or 10 miles per hour over it, however many kilometers per hour. In a better metric part of the world. Likewise, with religion, you have commandments, you have rules against certain infidelity, murder, and stuff. Again, rules and laws, and religion trying to discern right and wrong. There's a way deeper discussion to be had about the role of religion throughout humanity's evolution. Evolution itself being controversial under some religions. But again, just it's a way of people telling right from wrong. And the part that I really take issue with is the much like laws, the belief that just because something is right, it'll just magically happen. Like, well, wait, you can't. Trump can't do that. It's against the law. Yeah, we know. What are you going to do about it? Likewise, religion tends to the issue I take with religion is that some of it falls back on, oh well, and now the higher power will just do things. If they're omniscient and omnipotent, they're all knowing and they're good, then they would just fix the problem, and that's clearly not happening. And then a lot of religious people will fall back on like that's part of God's plan. So you can't discuss them with them about anything about what to do about a certain situation if all they're going to say is it'll eventually even itself out. It's like, yeah, it will in the bad way because you didn't do anything about it. You have to acknowledge reality. um, so otherwise again, it's just good to believe in something, and if people use that to inspire themselves to do good, then fine, they're actually doing something. That's all. Just the laws and religion, like nothing against like what legal and stuff like that. Just yeah, the amount of people who can just discuss endlessly about like that's right, that's wrong. It comes down to your ability to do something, and it's just frustrating when you just see like, oh well, yeah, checks and balances, the law will just take care of it. Um, just impeach them again. It's yeah, you just kind of need to do stuff. um, Destiny, Karma, and Chance. So it's I thought that was a nice segue from religion in that again there are worldviews in which yeah there are people who believe that things just happen, or that things were always meant to happen. And sure, I guess um, there are sequences of events where you can uh, try to create like causation, correlation. Because this happened, the next thing happens, and the logical next step is that that leads to that. Like, fine. Um, but this gets into some really deep stuff with like free will. Like, do you have the capacity to change anything? Were you always supposed to do things that way? And I believe that like some a sociologist, I'm not, I didn't, I'm not a sociologist. U.S. education system, tuition, degrees, burnout. It did not work out for me. But from the sociology classes I did take, uh, just that, yeah, of course. And before I even took the sociology courses, it was really just saying the stuff I knew because of politics I'd researched in my own time. Um, just like, yeah, again, the circumstances of your birth and all of these indicators, socioeconomic, will lead a person under these circumstances with these influences in their life. They will tend to turn out like this. Not a guarantee. Obviously, we've seen there are people who, with very conservative backgrounds, they will reject it and they will become like incredibly progressive. Likewise, you could just see somebody who is raised conservative and they will be indoctrinated and they will take that with them. So you can't just copy that and expect the same results because that's the randomness of life. But it is still good to acknowledge the reality of like, okay, well, if you place people in an indoctrination chamber, there is some tendency that that can happen. Um, and then likewise, yeah, there are progressive parents and their kid through desperation um, starts believing in right wing ideology. They become understandably selfish because their standard of living is slipping away, and again, their dissatisfaction with life they place blame on different parts of society, and if that happens to be like, oh, all minorities, or oh, it's the women who don't want to have sex, and oh, right, they there can be acknowledging of the problems, and the issue then becomes based on your politics. You have different ideas of how to solve them. Like, hey, let's change the social programs versus like, if we just kill all the minorities, deport the illegals and stuff, then that'll fix the problems. And if they didn't, that's where you get into the saying of you can't reason somebody out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. It's if it's illogical, there's only so much debate that you can have, and again, that goes off into a discussion of polarization of politics in the modern day that people become entrenched in. It's harder to engage in civil debate because again, they didn't reason their way in there. They're going to fight you illogically, and the more that you have to look up your sources, provide an actual response, you're spending time that that doesn't convince them. And in the time that it took you to do all that research, they just said about a billion other lies that you then have to fact check and slowly engage with over and over and over. And this is I forget if it's somewhere down there, but I mean that starts the difficult discussion of like, do you reform them? Can you can are you able to reintegrate them? What do you do when uh, the existential threat to humanity um, can no longer be reasoned with? Right. This is where climate change is kind of the end goal, not the end goal, but like the end boss of like, do you acknowledge reality? Can we even talk to people about this? What we can fix? What can't we fix? So yeah, verbal direct conflict, correct, wins with strength. Um, I think what I was getting at there, gosh, I'm looking back on something I typed like months ago, I think. Um, but let me see. I think I might get into it later, but verbal direct conflict, that brings to mind, I mean, United Healthcare CEO. That was a fun instance of people across almost all political aisles could acknowledge, like, yeah, screw that guy. And that's an example of direct versus indirect conflict. And people acknowledging like what violence is and some of the power dynamics. So clearly, somebody who's stabbing somebody, physical violence that you can see right in front of you, and you can visualize that is easy for people to see and call violence, terrorism, because that person killed one person. Okay, and if you're willing to see that, then the person who is running a business, um, somebody who's just signing papers in an office at a desk, somebody who's coming up with policies, decisions that will affect hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of people. If people are able to connect the dots and say that, okay, well, that person then is at least somewhat responsible for the suffering and death of those tens, hundreds, thousands of people. And even then, the United Healthcare CEO is just, it's not the individual. If you take that guy, then you solve the problem. He's still incentivized within the capitalist system to make profits, to run that business as the way it is, and not, it's not really providing healthcare, it's there to make money. It just happens to be tied to healthcare. And you get to see people get sick, not get treatment, die. And right, just imagine that, but for everything else, food, housing, that's where, that is the left-ish view of the situation. In a nutshell, um, I'm super rambly about it, but I mean, yeah, that's because I saw how, because it's, people were saying like this is going to be the class consciousness moment. Everybody, even the conservatives, can see how the rich create this situation, but obviously it hasn't been. This wasn't the breaking point quite yet, but at least got it. It at least got people started talking, and that's something. Um, yeah, might makes right. I think people get into that about like this war doesn't determine who's right, just who's left. Um, and that's survivorship bias in a way, and just like whoever the winner gets to write history. It's harder for the underdog to spread their message, right? And we're dealing with that right now with, again, the left is usually called like radical leftists, who just want people to have health care and good workers' rights, human rights like housing, food, healthcare, education, childcare, and stuff like that. You just get called like a terrorist, in that anything that they are asking for would destroy society, and therefore you can never talk to them or even give them an inch, um, because they don't want to disrupt their power, essentially. So I mean, yeah, I think that's what I meant when I wrote that. So, all right, individualist versus collectivist. So yeah, this is where um, the U.S. hyper individualism, um, about like freedom and independence, and where you, the individual, you just need to work hard, and that's what you should and could be doing. Um, like, oh, no, I always have to say, like, of course, it does matter what you do, but there are limitations, and when things are broken on such a large scale, it becomes overwhelming for the individual to process that. That's when you're supposed to act as a collective, and that is what politics is supposed to be. Is you have representatives, you have government, you have people who have authority and are responsible at a large enough level that you are supposed to be able to trust to handle that so that you can live your life at the small scale and not supposed to, you're not supposed to be worried about the things at large, because the average person, I believe, like you, people have trouble imagining things at such large scale. Like you have like your friends, your family, but imagining thousands and thousands, millions, billions, like a lot of people, that's just a number. And if you just say billions are suffering, then like, oh well, that's pretty sad. Uh, so I mean, that's why you're supposed to have people who specialize in that. Um, but in any case, yeah, the individualist versus collectivist. This is where I believe I start getting into a lot more specifics, because I mean, that's what pop culture is. It's a story, and most writing structures are, you have a protagonist. It's literally the one point of view, the main character, because you have, because they remain like consistent with that person, and you get to see their development. Whether or not they change throughout the story, something else. And so that's kind of like it's a limitation, and that kind of just comes with the territory unless you do something like I'm sure plenty have done it, but my first exposure to it was some of the Game of Thrones books, where you would just have chapters written in from the perspective of a character, and it would then swap between chapters, and that helps, but it understandably can get people mixed around when they have to see the name. It's like, okay, everything that I just saw, keep it compartmentalized to that person. We're jumping to this next one, um, and that is difficult for people. And so the main character syndrome, part of that problem with pop culture then is um, what we're seeing with like The Last of Us, a lot of, but plenty of stories is that you usually, well, from that perspective, they are the good guys, and everything matters because stories are about exceptional people usually. And, it would be difficult to connect with people if the main character dies. You would have to write the story specifically to get around that sort of mindset of like, yeah, and they're just special. Like, no, it took this. That's the amount of attempts it would take before you can actually get a revolution off the ground or something. And it's not just magic; it's just them trying, and that it's hard to get people to believe that, and you don't want to make people give up either. But that would be how it works instead of just expecting some magical messiah figure to just solve all the problems. Um, this yeah, main character. The flip side of that then is NPCs, um, background characters, essentially in any story, and this is where you get into the some of the toxic side because when people are viewed as NPCs, like you're not a real person because I have the main perspective. I'm the main character who matters, and everybody else, you're just little robots. You're little servant worker bees serving me, the king or queen, um, and that's I'm the only one that matters. And yeah, that's super toxic to believe that nobody else cares about have their own wants and beliefs and hopes and dreams or something. And there are people who believe that again, not you. You might only have the um, emotional social battery to engage with your own viewpoint. We're not really expecting people to have full empathy because, yeah, that would break a person to just know that somewhere on the planet right now, with billions of people, somebody's probably dying. Somebody in the time it took for me to say that sentence, right? But you cannot emotionally connect on that level constantly every single time. And so in that sense, yes, that they are not essential to my life, but to even acknowledge that that is happening is some level of empathy. And that's why I bring it up, why that's important. That for the purposes of a story, even the NPCs matter and they are devices to help move the story forward, and they mattered. Um, and it could be up to random chance, and it's up to the viewer to understand that. I don't know. You get into like nature versus nurture, people's upbringing to understand that how you teach people that in a completely random circumstance, the main character could have been an NPC, and somebody else would have taken the mantle of main character, right? That's the kind of story that helps teach people empathy, that it's good to try, but also this is just the story that happened to work out the way that it did. Um, and that's in a whole other uh, subject of like stories that are mandated to be written so that the good guys win. You have to inspire the children. But okay, if it's not written for children, then do you have stories where the good guy doesn't win when you're an adult, where they try multiple times and you actually see that instead of it being like a little note that said like this is that oh well this is like the fifth attempt. This is why I like Gurren Lagann, which I'll get into I think a little later. But yeah, empathy, family, filler, other big topics here where yeah, your family, the in group, are the ones that matter. So this is where you get into like limited empathy, which happens with some conservatives, where it's like, oh well, I love my parents and I love my community, and I don't want anything bad to happen to them, which is why um, millions, billions others should suffer, and they don't matter because I don't know them. Um, but those are family to somebody else. So yeah, again, that's just, do you have the time, energy, uh, mental capacity to envision that for others? Um, Last of Us is doing this right now. Filler. So in pop culture, term comes up, but very contentious. So yeah, a lot of people would say for the protagonist, the main story, the events that matter. Um, there's a lot of criticism when time is spent in pop culture to cover story arcs that do not necessarily move the main plot as much. And I believe, and that ties right in with main character syndrome and background NPCs, things that matter. And people get annoyed because, I mean, it's pop culture. They expect with the leisure time that they have to sit down and absorb a story, that they're going to get a resolution. And so whenever there's something that happens that does not directly deal with that, the filler doesn't matter. When really a lot of stories, if they're well written, will usually have some tie-in uh, to the main plot anyways, and that is how it does matter. Um, and I believe it ties in the same way that if you're making a world, then you want to avoid falling into a story writing trap, which is eventually the escalation of conflict, which is, you know, how a story works. Start low and it goes escalates to the climax, and then you share how the story ends, the epilogue, how everything went. That's just progression, but then that's not really how the real world always works, because yeah, the world has to be worth living in, so you see those calm moments, and you see the other things that do have a more gradual influence. And if the only thing that ever matters is the world ending thing, then you've written yourself into a trap where, like, then the next thing has to be even more exciting, and the next thing has to be even more exciting, and it gets out of scope really quickly. um, but again, I realize that the people who get into this, it could be seen as the climate change people, because like that is the most important thing. We're gonna die, but I also understand that we need to address that quickly. But there are all these other small things happening, other social, uh, civil rights under attack at the same time. And I understand that there are people who are being affected by that right now. So that's why I can't just say, right, in the real world, anything that isn't climate change, filler. Trans rights, bisexual, LGBTQ, um, the plight of specifically uh, African Americans, Asian hate crimes. Yeah, but don't you care about all life on the planet? Stuff like, yeah, that matters too. I know that, like, I'm obviously Asian, but that's like, yeah, that's how it would be easy to immediately push aside anything that is not the main story. Um, Don Don, recent anime and pretty fun. I saw that episode 7 hit people pretty hard. So, you know, it's silly show with aliens and ghosts, and it delves into like youth relationships, coming of age, and that's great and all. But yeah, episode 7 is where a lot of people were hit out of nowhere, showing a story of a single mother. And without getting too much into spoilers, but just, I guess I already highlighted it, but I mean, yeah, you just see a single mother try to raise her kid, and the socioeconomics of like jobs and trying to survive, but also splurging for the things that, for some luxuries that bring them extra joy and make life a little more enjoyable than just eat, sleep, wake up, live in house. Like that's it. Just you're allowed to seek that, and then just so happens to be on the get in with bad people, and really bad things happen. But what I mainly wanted to get at by showcasing Dan Da Dan is an example of like, okay, and that's just one person. So if you imagine the socioeconomics that lead to people struggling with jobs, trying to have the time, money, and energy to spend with their loved ones, right? Then you would criticize the whole system, uh, just like Squid Game. Instead of like, well, that one person should have done that differently, and then it would have been solved. No, that would keep happening in other ways. But I just wanted to bring that show up. It was pretty big recently, and there was a lot of emotional resonance there. Um, Leaders and competency. So this one, with individualist collectivist mindset on that. There's been several fun videos that people have about like why do you in video games why do you call them a boss, and then in plenty of other pop culture you have supervillains, you have gang mob bosses, and the leader is always the strongest one. And in the rising story arc, it is like start weak and then you keep growing and growing and growing until you face them, and that's the one that you gotta fight. Just the clearly, as we're seeing again, current politics, Trump and all that. Just because you're the leader or something does not make you smart. Elon Musk, it's like we're actually seeing the other side where it's like, no, if you just the random circumstances of your birth, your family, your parents grants you a huge amount of wealth and access to connections and resources that almost ensure that you're going to stay in a position of status and wealth, and you're going to throw your wealth around to continue to do other really stupid stuff, and any of the good things that come out of your work are out of coincidence, and because of course you employ a lot of people who do have actual talent, and they're just trying to survive. It's just that their work happens to bring out some sort of technological breakthrough, and yeah, you can just claim credit for that. So I mean, yeah, bosses just by nature of video games and stuff like where the climax needs to happen, it needs to be some sort of epic fight and encounter. I Over time, that pop culture leads to people thinking like, yeah, 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 they gotta be the strongest. No, a good leader would really just be anybody who has the management skills or has good personal skills and the judgment to realize like, oh, well, you're good at this, and out of the structure that we have, you would be work well in this position, and right, just have enough. You have enough charisma to connect people, right, without it becoming psychopathy. Or I think I think people have talked about the links between traits that we designate as like good leadership skills versus psychopathy, and I might get into it somewhere down there, but yeah, like your ability to manipulate people to do what you want, the ability to be charismatic to draw people to you, but then to take advantage of them um, by making them starstruck or something. Uh, yeah, your willingness to exploit others. Just what kind of leader are you? Do you throw away subordinates? How do you wield that power and authority? But yeah, certainly leaders are not immediately competent, the strongest. And I'm not sure again if it's somewhere else in here, but criticizing how usually it's viewed much more acceptably to maim and or kill the minions, subordinates of any given organization in your action movie and whatever the thugs and the poor workers who are probably just trying to survive to provide for their family. And then when you get to the boss, it's always, oh yeah, now the legal system will take care of you just in time for the status quo of your superhero movie or whatever to fail, and they get out again just so you can keep on writing stories and selling a highly marketable uh, rogues gallery, which I think I get into that later, I'm sure, with superheroes. Um, so yeah, individualist collective reaction to an insane world. Right. So Um, this one comes up with again the mindfulness therapy, all that stuff. So again, there are people who have some internal inconsistencies and uncertainties about themselves, where of course they probably need medication and therapy, something to help them deal with that. But yeah, we get into stuff here where people bring up like the U.S. mental health crisis on such a large scale, where there have been some really great tweets about like, okay, so if we're all certainly they need help, but we're all looking at the same illogical system and reacting to it because it is a bad system, and your unhappiness is with the material conditions of the world, your inability to comfortably find housing, food, healthcare, education, and your stress at the working conditions and the expectations for productivity, um, which take away from your ability to express yourself or have a healthy amount of leisure time. That response, that rejection of that, looks unhealthy to other people. It's like, oh yeah, they're just fighting the system because they're lazy. And that's the thing. Maybe I am lazy, and I'd like to find that out in a healthier environment where I'm not being where I'm not getting the productivity squeezed out of you, because that's what drives people to burnout. Multiple entry level jobs, customer service. Yeah, I would totally understand why somebody just eventually uh, turns to drugs or something, and because they're just tired of it. Yeah, a logical reaction to an insane world. The trick is to find what people's natural resting balance point would be when they're not being and stretched, squeezed, whatever analogy that you want for that. But yeah, just that if you're only looking at an individualist, you would say something's wrong with that person instead of, oh yeah, the Amazon working conditions that make a bunch of people pee in bottles because they're punished if they take a longer bathroom break or something. It's like, oh yeah, no, they're all psychos who want to pee in bottles or something. And like you're supposed to look at it as a collective. Why do you run businesses like this? Why do you need that level of productivity? Um, where is the wealth going? You could clearly um, you could hire people, you could invest in technology to make things safer, more efficient. But if it's more cost efficient for them to keep things outdated or something, then they'll do it. Somebody's run the numbers on it. When I worked like at Popeyes and stuff, if you don't need to update a piece of equipment, why invest in it? You would make things better for your workers to actually hear things. Um, but yeah, it's expected that the individual workers just deal with it. Um, so that's where I was getting at. Self-sacrifice versus insane zealot. So this is another trope, pop culture, um, where yeah, it's about life and death. So whenever you have a goal, then if you believe in something strong enough, then you're willing, and they believe it's something bigger than yourself, then you get heroic sacrifices in pop culture. Um, but you will also see that used as a plot point where like, oh, they're willing to die, so there's some sort of like suicide bomber, an insane zealot. So I mean, really, it's not about the death that suddenly makes something taboo. It's just whether or not you already agreed with the cause. And so pop culture, it depends on how uh, how acceptable a given cause is. Like, oh, this revolution, no, they're just a bunch of terrorists. So anybody who dies, they're just willing to die, and they're being sacrificed for the greater good, like some sort of cult and stuff. Versus if you showed that from the hero's perspective, it's like that's a sacrifice, and they're just hoping that it'll work out, and it sounds so noble. So that's basically it. I think I'll get into more like motivations and the terrorism versus hero perspective a little later. Um, so yeah, trolley problem, proportional response. Chose those words specifically in Israel, Palestine, all that. Um, Politics of like trolley problems. We have that. I already talked about United Healthcare. Right? People will balance out the like, well, if you do this thing, you save a life, and it versus doing something else, you save 5 lives. But in order to do that, you got to kill somebody else. And so again, some of that is zero sum, um, and the trolley problem is just supposed to spark discussion. But again, most of the time, you don't even have to make a cost like that. There isn't some payment that you have to do like that. In our case, the trolley problem would be something like, hey, if you redistributed the wealth of a couple of billionaire trillionaires, we could address the needs of millions and billions of people across the planet. And they still didn't even want to do that. So that's the kind of trolley problem we're dealing with. The ones that get brought up in shows like The Last of Us and whatnot, I'll get into those later. But yeah, people are where it's even when it's something like that trolley problem where if I sacrificed a loved one, maybe I'll save the rest of humanity, and that's already a tough one. But it doesn't even need to be that drastic. Just a couple of rich people living less luxuriously than they were before, and they probably still have plenty of their needs met. Um, yeah, proportional response that gets into self-sacrifice and Saint Zealot stuff again too, where like if you do something for the right reasons, you've wronged somebody. There are times where they won't feel satisfied until they get back, and even then, usually they have to do more. A good example of proportional response, I think there are, if you play games, then the idea that if you lose a game, then you now have to win a game to feel better. Well, kind of no, you're right back at neutral. What I think what a lot of people would want then is to get on a winning streak, to win a bunch of games in a row. But if you're playing against other people, then that competitive spirit means that in order for you to win, they have to lose. And so then for them to feel better, they also need to then win many times in a row to get their confidence back. Um, but again, as long as you have a zero sum game where that's the only way that things feel right, somebody always ends up feeling bad. Um, but yeah, it doesn't have to be that way, but that's what people perceive. So now get into a couple of specific situations. Bugs Life, ants, obvious bugs, hive minds, and collectives. Those pop culture clearly about like little guys rising up against a bigger threat, finding strength collectively that individually they would be almost no match. Yeah, there's discussions about whether Bugs Life or Ants has like a better socialist message and all that. I think Bugs Life was like a little bit more individualist, or I don't know, but I mean, yeah, those are examples. I'm sure this is like base level. Good job, Martin. This is college 101 analysis. Um, yeah, Hopper, the speech that Hopper gives in Bugs Life, pretty big one. Um, the anti-worker messaging and by some of the like what the military guy in Ants. Um, so I mean, yeah, you could make an entire video. This is where the scope of this is scary because like yeah, you could make entire YouTube videos about that. This is already like almost unapproachable. um, then MOBAs, Heroes of the Storm. This is a big one where I don't even like. Obviously, I don't. MOBAs can be very toxic um, because they're depending on how they're designed. Because you're supposed to be a team, but there's enough space in a lot of MOBAs for individual glory, and you get into that difference again where like oh the rewards are individualized, which means that individuals are incentivized to get the kills, get the gold. They get are able to afford better equipment and loot. They get stronger. If they get more experience, they level up higher, and there's going to be a level difference between others on their team. So it allows for moments of glory, but it also means that there are times where one person gets the star and everybody else just gets left behind. This is where Heroes of the Storm, I feel, while still being a MOBA, has one of the best collectivist designs that I was able to tolerate, where you don't even have gold, a store, or anything, and It's a group project for better and for worse. I think overall it's better because there are very few times where I feel like, oh, I'm the member of the group project where I do a lot of the work and everybody else is just kind of coasting along. It's just because it's easier to stick together as a team, then nobody gets left behind. And as long as everybody's really trying, then you're probably going to be okay. Um, that you're able to just focus on uh, team synergy. As long as you work together on the objectives, um, make a decent effort, then you'll probably have a pretty good time. And all of that combines so that overall my positive experiences outweigh the negatives, as opposed to games that are in MOBAs that are like hyper individualist, where if you where you're not kept together with your team, then I feel like, yeah, while the skill ceiling is higher on some of those games, uh, it breeds that sort of competitive toxicity even between your own team members and not just with the other team. Because as soon as your team sees a slight imperfection, that's something they can latch onto, and you're literally competing with each other for gold and resources or whatever by killing minions. You're going to see that competitive aspect pop up several times throughout some of these. So XCOM Darkest Dungeon XP. This is basically more rehashing of the RPG thing I brought up um, about, yeah, up there, mean testing, proving yourself. There are numerous cases where as soon as somebody gets strong enough in the RPG, then they become more capable. They're more likely to survive. They're more likely to do more things. So they pull ahead in experience. They leave others behind, right? So it is on you, the commander. You usually have to make some sort of conscious effort actually to try to even things out, so that you don't have one person who hogs all the glory and therefore has a support team that is completely unable to do anything when you need them, because you didn't invest in them. So quite literally, like your star player will get disabled or something, and you then have backup teams, right? XCOM and Darkest Dungeon, you literally, if you rely on you could probably do a full game with a star team, but yeah, the odds that something happens and you're suddenly thrown back to square one because you didn't account for that possibility, um, that is that's on the player, individualist, collectivist. The game doesn't really force you to do that, just that it's on the player to recognize that that can happen, so that sure, maybe you don't have a person who's achieved quite the same heights as if you'd invested everything in the one person, but that means that you're not caught out of nowhere as soon as so that you're not relying on the one pillar to support everything. uh, there's that. Celebrities, influencers, individuals, collective, yeah, I mean, it's the celebrity culture. It's easier for people to focus on one notable individual. We've seen criticisms of influencer culture, parasocial relationships, a bunch of fans kind of flocking behind everything that they do, uh, using their influence for negative as well as positive events. But it's, yeah, that's just an easy consolidation. You're able to focus on the one person, and then you can criticize them when you see that, oh, the celebrity's just been bought out by sponsored or something, taking a right-wing grift is the usual way. um, and yeah, you criticize them. With great power comes great responsibility. So that's always the interesting thing you would imagine about being like a YouTuber, being an actual celebrity with enough of a following, gaining enough acclaims. You always think you would assume that there is some obligation to avoid imposter syndrome. Like, oh well, wow, enough people want to support me and they believe in the things that I say. I gotta lead them to greatness, and I want to help people too. And of course, all the bad people, they also think they're the good guys, because that's protagonist syndrome. That's just what happens. Um, a lot of bad people story writing. They're not really outright supposed to say like, I'm the bad guy. That doesn't really make sense for their motivation to just cause chaos out of nowhere. It's just they usually have a motivation that they feel that they're doing the right thing. And so, yeah, you're supposed to use that influence for good. Uh, so this is where, yeah, this is where superheroes, MHA, Incredibles, The Boys, Punisher, and then how that relates to actual police, law enforcement. So I listed some specifics, but of course it is about a genre as a whole, and it can tie into anything dealing with this subject matter. It's just that superheroes are very prevalent and one of the easiest to um, as a metaphor, I guess, for law enforcement, right and wrong, and upholding society. Is that yeah, superheroes usually represent some sort of status quo. It's a super version of how you address problems in the real world. So instead of just police just trying to stop crime, you just have a police officer who does supernatural super things, and the problems that arise from that just because of the framing. Again, it's not because some of that status quo involves imagining that the same problems would just be there, which is understandable to some extent if the story dives into it. So I already brought it up above, right? If you have superpowers and stuff in a world where, like, oh, you could just use a superpower and you would have people who can just create houses out of nothing, and you just teach them how to build. I mean, that's literally what's happening in Invincible and stuff like that, right? And if you address the wealth inequality, you can get you have people who control nature with magic or powers and stuff. Like then you're solving food, right? All of these things combined, so that you can then say like, okay, so then in that world, where's the crime coming from? Like, or would they already, or you acknowledge that you could do that, and that the powers that be that create society just decide to not use those powers for good, that they only use those things to to suppress people. So that's like always a funny one with like poison ivy or something. Like I think they have some messaging that's like against billionaires and stuff like that. But yeah, it's on the writer to imagine a world where like, oh, well, if somebody could just control plants, they would immediately address this scarcity issue supposedly in the real world. Um, and just if your story at no point delves into like, but why aren't they able to use these powers this way? Um, and I think this is where some cynicism arises, right? Where there's Invincible. Yeah, I guess I mentioned it here with multiverses and stuff, but the idea is the same. That if you have characters who can once you reach the portion of power scaling, where like bend reality or time travel or something, right? Then people, of course, bring that up all the time. That oh, that's jumping the shark. The story can't come back from this. There are consequences. How are they going to make there be consequences? Where the point still remains, just like yeah, you could solve so many problems. The fact that the world still remains in conflict and there's a need for crime, you need to suppress the crime. There's so much crime everywhere. Um, the biggest one is characters. Oh, damn it! So now I guess what Invincible? Okay, with characters like Angstrom Levy, where you can just take the best from every universe. Um, yeah, and you still just the amount of people when those episodes were airing who immediately saw apparently there's like Kang, and I don't know what universe that's from. Is that DC or Marvel or something? So I mean, spoilers for that too. I just don't know. Um, but like, yeah, the amount of people who are cynical as soon as they hear I'm a person who has power and I'm going to use it for good, really just says more about cynicism about like modern day politicians, because we've clearly had so many people who make promises and as soon as they get in power they don't do that. um, and then of course then you're stuck with like in the US like, well, we need to get an actual progressive politician who's making a who is making a big promise and who can keep up with that, as opposed to somebody who has a goal that is already compromised, and they're meeting in the middle with the status quo. And even then, when they get elected, they will not even do that much. So you're compromising on a compromise to achieve half of your original goal. When people are just find that obnoxious, to put it kindly, say like just make the promise and just do it. This is why you just go for the biggest goal possible, which is where I will get into with Gurren Lagann. Um, but yes, the stories can still be enjoyable for other reasons, not trying to stomp on people, but yeah, the things like Harry Potter, likewise, so you can just magic things, and just because you have to keep the world and its problems the same, you don't believe that sort of change, that actual progressive change is possible, indicates some sort of a lack of imagination, or at least a willingness to keep things the same because uh, financially, writers are incentivized, right? And I understand because you would need to take care of the writers or whoever comes up with these stories, um, so that they would actually write a conclusive story, instead of like, oh, but if you end the story, you're not going to be able to use this world anymore. You're not going to be able to use those marketable characters, right? If you stop the bad guy, you're not going to be able to do another one. That's why people are so jaded about the character deaths, and oh, this is an actual consequence, or yeah, this character's super dead for real this time, guys, or oh, and they just did a time travel thing. Oh, they just reset the universe. And whether that's in the universe or not, like somebody who actually has powers that do that, or it's like, okay, well, this version of the universe is done, and now just do it all again. And so yeah, you just see the same things pop up and over, because the writer doesn't want, understandably, doesn't want to brainstorm an entirely new cool design, a new world, design a new world again. It's a lot of work. Um, so I mean, yeah, that is a socioeconomic writer's conflict. But yeah, I mean, MHA does address some of them, but I mean, ultimately, it still comes down to you could just decide to use the powers for other things other than just crime. Um, so yeah, Incredibles is like more status. Almost all of these are status quo problems, because none of these end with like, and then they've solved all of humanity's problems, most of humanity's scarcity issues and stuff. But Incredibles is a good one for the insurance. Insuracare, I think, is the company that Bob works for. Obviously, as soon as the United Healthcare CEO situation happened, a lot of people brought that scene up again. Um, I don't know enough about the boys, but I know that there's cynicism about how you run a society in that one. Punisher and the police, pretty direct link there, regarding like, do you go vigilante? You take the law into your own hands when you see that uh, the law is a multi-tiered system that treats the poor very differently from the elites, the rich at the top, who have regulatory capture. They've already bribed, have influence with all the people involved, such that they will never get in trouble. And obviously, killing is not the preferred method, but how we've tried so many other ways to get there, and they don't even want to talk. Yeah, the police as like a status quo maintaining force that don't actually exist to protect and serve. In the U.S., we would refer to Uvalde and stuff. Just that, yeah, and the problems with these as status quo is all of these serving as um, viewed as these are the problem solvers, and if a problem comes up, crime or whatever, then that just means that you need to invest into these more. Um, that problem with that discussion is obviously like, oh well, you could just have social programs, you could have things that so that people are not desperate for, again, housing, food, water, crime, healthcare, education, all that for their children, having a future that they can believe in, stuff that would make them less likely to commit crime. You get far more efficiency out of that than, oh, infinite money to the police or the superpowered police. And that is a huge criticism of that. It doesn't have to go. This is where the defund the police things comes in. whether oh well they don't even want to discuss that because they don't like the way the word is used. It's like okay, reallocate some funds, and then they don't even want to do that either. Um, so I mean, yeah, these are specific examples. Multiverses for the Spider Verse stuff. So that does tie into what I said about like you can't even imagine a better world when the idea of a multiverse is literally every other iteration of the universe where like a tiny little thing is different or this change is different and stuff like that. Or what if the United States had universal health care? And so you don't have all these superhero storylines where all somebody commits a crime so that they can get medicine or afford medicine for their loved ones. And so what people, I think I'm pretty sure I have Breaking Bad somewhere down here, but like that's one of the big ones about like imagine that in another country that where they would already be cared for, and it wouldn't start Walter White down that route. Obviously, some people then bring in, oh well, the exception to this is like, oh, this is like a character trait, so that blah 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 blah. It's like fine, but it would just be that much different for him to get there, rather than like withholding an essential need like a family's healthcare. Um, and then I did want to focus on Spider Verse and Invincible in that it ties into the individual collectivist, where it's an analysis of the protagonist. And so I think I'm highlighting this because of some spoilers. So the main thing with Spider Verse and Invincible, from what I saw, is the idea that oh well, this is a special universe where the main character is a certain way, but it is revealed to them that in other universes they are likely or almost guaranteed to turn out another way. And um, there's some there's a lot of fighting over like why discussion about why they turned out the way they do, and that's where you would have analysis of like their circumstances, their nature versus nurture, outside influences. Not that they're always going to turn out that way, um, but there is at least some main character syndrome in that where in any messaging where it's about like nah I'm special, I'm built different, and that's why it's going to work out. At least some acknowledging of how of things that are like out of your control. um, I don't know if how do I get into this. So the Spider Verse, like the whole canon event thing does sound like um, destiny, which as I've stated above I don't really believe in that. But you're also dealing with kind of fourth wall breaking uh, in universe discussion. So they're acknowledging a comic book universe, and in that case, this is where you would get into even things like religion with D&D, which I do think I get into later. Um, yeah, about like yeah, religion would be a lot easier when the universe literally shows you evidence, right? It's harder for you to for religion in like D&D or any fantasy universe to call that faith in the universe because they are literally throwing magic spells and miracles around when you pray for them and something happens. So that's not faith anymore. That is a thing that happens, as opposed to in the real world where you could pray all day long and that doesn't make something happen. So that's where I'm getting at. Like Deadpool is like this too, but if there's something about like canon where like this has to happen, but you just think, oh well, I'm gonna change it because I believe hard enough. That only works if the writer allows you to do that, and if you're dealing with like a DM or somebody else, then you're just making a meta commentary on animator versus animation, like those stick figure animations on YouTube, where like, oh, it's gonna fight you in the draw in your art app with the mouse of the artist or something. It's like, yeah, at that point, it's just a funny YouTube video thing. Um, so yeah, that's where things kind of fall apart if you're using pop culture as a stand-in for real life, but you bring in things that are not true to real life. Because yeah, things would be different in real life if we had a god that actually proved they exist, or if you just wish that things happen, um, they would happen. I if it worked that way, we would have I'd have an entirely different ideology. So that's my criticism of that, which I again will get into with Gurren Lagann. It's my favorite series, and you probably tell that before. um, but yeah, Persona 5, Death Note. Some of this is yeah, more specific series with vigilanteism as a main component. So Persona 5, big one, just a bunch of in pure anime fashion, bunch of like teenagers uh, taking the law into their own hands, and it's a great what if when I watched playthroughs of it for the first time. Just that, okay, you're bypassing some of um, the taboo of going vigilante by saying like, okay, but you don't have to kill them. Your main thing is you infiltrate somebody's mind and you literally change their thinking, which is scary in another level for sure. But this is where people have their lines in the sand. That's kind of their whole issue with saying like, oh, but if you kill somebody, they have no chance of living another part of their life. You're robbing them of that time and stuff. It's like, okay, well, they live, but if they're a fundamentally different person, then that is the death of like their personality or their my freedom, yeehaw and stuff. It's like, yeah, and Persona 5 has their escalations with like, okay, if you dealt with like somebody who is like a sexual predator, all the way up to if you have a political candidate. I'm living in the U.S. You have political candidates who literally just will lie, mislead, um, go off of populism, and yeah, if they have no intention of actually utilizing their power for good, they uh, lie and do things differently once they're in office or whatever, all self-interested instead of helping people like a governmental person should. It's like yeah, you literally what happens when that person has a toxic mindset, and so it sure sucks. Where you would prefer to not have to mind wipe them or to convince them to change their ways because talking with them in the real world to get them to change their ways, we kind of see where that does and does not work infinitely. And again, if it's something like climate change, well, yeah, I'm going to convince them after a couple more centuries, at which point we will all be fucking underwater and dead. Um, but I mean, yeah, that's why I appreciated Persona 5 coming out for like, okay, you don't have to kill them. You can. And there are plot points that do that, where like going vigilante as an individualist taking action because the United Healthcare uh, assassin took an individual action, but you do need systemic change eventually. And then, of course, this context. Persona 5 is set in Japan, which is we've seen with like Shinzo Abe and that assassin. It's like he actually got his they actually got some reform somewhat towards like that religious cult or whatever. So I mean, this is where this is where we get into cultural differences about like, oh well, when something happens over there, they actually look a little bit more at it, and people say, and just like the United Healthcare, people say, oh yeah, I agree with that too. I don't like that cult that has political ties, so people end up supporting an assassination and stuff like that. It's this is where yeah, individual change can spur collective action when enough people see it, but you can't expect individuals to only do it and collectively when you just talk about it endlessly without making a big example, like an actual start to spearhead the change to spread elsewhere, then yeah, you're stuck in limbo forever. Um, Death Note, I don't personally I have not seen it, but I know the concept. So I mean, yeah, just more ideas of like if you had the option to just suddenly kill the bad people. This is similar to the Hitler time travel thing. Just try and travel back in time and kill baby Hitler, and it's like okay, well the point of the thought process is doing a greater good, as opposed to like well if you actually had time travel, you just make sure they don't turn out like authoritarian neo-Nazi. Use your time travel powers for that instead of jumping straight to murder. But that's the point of, of the hypothetical. But yeah, that's another vigilante pop culture. Oh yeah, and I brought up yeah in Persona 5, Billy Kametz, um, his monologue in Persona 5 Royal, where from the playthroughs I've watched, and stuff like that. The storyline is super compelling because it's this guy essentially seeking control over um, that reality, which is super villainy. And I mean, I have some problems with some Persona 5 writing where they start preaching about like self determination, and it becomes too individualist at times, where it's like, actually, because of my hard work and my drive, I actually pushed forward, blah blah blah, where it kind of steps on its own toes, where it's like, oh well, but you were given the chance to grow and to make a difference because of these persona psychic power things, and you were given a chance that not a lot of people had, and you had a support system with your friends and all these other things, so you didn't do this by yourself, and so you cannot preach about self-determination and hard work, just hard work or something like that. It's like your support system made that much easier, and it's then you could just tell somebody else to just get over it or something. And so yeah, Billy Kamet's character in Persona 5 Royal, um, not really just gonna summarize the whole thing, but yeah, is one of his last speeches is about. I mean, it's about his the end of his storyline is about like not being able to handle reality and seeking if you could just change it versus um, and fixing a problem in an semi artificial way because you can't. It's too painful to address to just wish that there are not problems. Um, it starts if you know the that ending that part of Persona 5, it starts to become similar to, oh well, you just need to deal with it, and it turns into suffering builds character, I feel. Again, not to say like, oh, ignore reality. It's just, again, you're living in a world where you understand how somebody gets you through the context of his backstory, you start to see how he believes that way, and why you would want to fix a problem like that. And then I highlight this specifically because the literal context of his of Dr. Maruki, Billy Kamet's character in the game. Billy Kamet at the time, I believe, had cancer. He died of cancer um, after after finishing his role there. So yes, to hear somebody screaming in a really good, you know, anime style dub, um, screaming about like not being able to accept reality and wanting to change something from a cancer patient, who I believe he's from the U.S., right, or something, but like, yeah, hearing a U.S. person screaming about cancer, about probably what he was channeling in his performance about cancer in a country that doesn't have universal health care and has to worry about whether or not you can get a doctor's checkup and a visit to catch these things before they become, uh, you know, less treatable and more fatal, to give as much time as possible. Yeah, there's almost, if you look up that Persona 5, some of the ending of Persona 5 Royal with Dr. Maruki, yeah, you could almost, you could just swap out like cancer for the events of the game, and you could just hear that person, and that is like, this is just an individual, but I mean, that is, yeah, in the greater social context, I could just hear like a healthcare please in a very morbid context from that character, and that's why I went out of my way to write this as soon as I saw that had happened, and the cancer thing, because yeah, everybody says, a lot of people in the U.S. will say like, "Fuck cancer." Universal healthcare. Are we gonna make our politicians demand that? Are we gonna vote for the ones who talk about that, or are we gonna keep voting for the ones that say that's not possible? Are you gonna say that the leftists who want universal healthcare and all that stuff, that you're the crazy people or something? You want that for everybody? Yeah, it's that one just struck me. I mean, you could, again, most of these you could do an entire YouTube video. Am I hitting it? I'm 2 hours plus right now. Holy shit. Um, all right, socioeconomics is probably going to be very similar to the superhero world building, universe creation status quo. But these are more specific. I think I get into more specific examples for a lot of the ones down here, because at this point I'd have already gotten my ideology about like leftism, how do you view the world, why the universes that are created in a lot of these are somewhat unsatisfactory. Um, and so socioeconomics, you can just be aware. Shows like The Office and Office Space, they're literally about people who are just working office jobs, and the monotony, the about of not feeling satisfied, poor leadership, the expectations of productivity, what you do versus what you want. It's quite literally just it's what it says on the tin. Hijinks ensue. Of course, they're still comedies, but I mean the basis of these are of just screwing around at work and wanting different stuff. But a lot of people relate to those because yeah, office jobs. So then video games, socioeconomics, Lethal Company and the spinoffs. Yeah, I think Repo is pretty relatively current. I mean, I'm sure people are riding the fad, but yeah, it's quite visible with people designing games that involve quotas. The idea that you have an ever increasing quota, and as soon as you don't meet it, game's over, and it's unrealistic because you never reach an acceptable level, right? It would be sustainable if it was humanly possible instead of like, oh, you got that much? Well, then do more. You got that much? Do more. Eventually, it becomes impossible even if you play almost perfectly, unless, right, because the amount of the value of things, if you have to meet like a certain monetary value, then the value of things has to go up. Otherwise, you're simply going to run out of items to collect and how much they're worth and how much that you can gather in a day, let alone all of the threats that are in these games that eventually will kill you because you could not take the time to slowly analyze the situation and handle it safely. And then as soon as somebody dies, you lose productivity and then the whole thing collapses. Yeah, there are tons of these where you're working for an exploitative company. It's very much uh, in your face about it, but obviously some people don't see what they want to see. But yeah, games about exploitative places have been around for a long time, which is why I mentioned tycoon games down here. Um, but yeah, Monopoly, just right there in the name. I'm sure there are YouTube videos documenting the history of Monopoly. I believe it was like made as a criticism of capitalism, or at least that sort of economic system, where you can see as you play the game, you go around and around and around. Eventually, the wealth consolidates. One person achieves more control, utilizes their wealth, invests in themselves to kick everybody else out until eventually it's a miserable experience for everybody involved, and only one person is doing everything, and then they win, and they've created the monopoly. It's not. It doesn't have to be that deep. It's right there in the name, and people will still be just like Squid Game. It's like, nah, it's just a fun game, and there's no deeper meaning. Um, Profiting from treating symptoms versus finding a solution, stores versus saving the world. So yeah, I included this line as a criticism of it's like, well, it's a game mechanic, but a lot of games will involve shops and they will sell the things that you need to save the world. And I'm sure there are people who will always have a good answer for, like, wait, if this world gets destroyed, then nobody's going to be able to go to the store. And why would they just not help you right away and solve the problem? As long as they have a profit motive or something, it's just some even with a profit motive, it seems completely illogical that somebody could just desire more currency and stuff when they have all the tools to just fix the problem. Um, yeah, and the idea that you can just treat a symptom instead of a solution, that gets into things like planned obsolescence as a great example. And it's just, yeah, if you sell something and you know you have a choice between making the one that is perfect, they will never need to replace it, it will work forever, and you can charge some amount for it. But that means that if that's the only one they need and it'll last forever, you're not going to get any repeat customers. You literally just do it once and that's it. Um, you are not incentivized to do that. If you think that you could also then make, instead of the perfect one, make a product that is good enough but they will have to eventually, and you probably make it for lower cost because it's not the perfect research and materials and stuff like that, but it still has to cost something. So they then have to buy it, and then when it breaks down, they buy another and another and another and another. If they trust you enough that, I guess it lasted long enough for my purposes. So then you were literally given the choice of making the perfect product or just getting resell by making it just good enough, and they choose profits. Um, that's yeah. There's been numerous examples of that, and every single time that somebody says like, "Oh, they don't make it like they used to," kinda, yeah. When you have a materialistic society that's based on easily disposable, replaced items and stuff, then you are quite literally dealing with planned obsolescence and a bunch of things that will, instead of solving a problem, just find ways to justify their own existence. I think a criticism of that is like big pharma. Some conspiracy theories there, and I mean, like on some basic level, it makes sense that, but it's the paranoia that like, why would they ever cure a disease if they could just charge you to keep getting treated for it over and over and over? And so, yeah, whatever conspiracy is there, it's more about the U.S. healthcare system being for profit, rather than like people just deciding not to cure things. But that logic does make sense in that, yeah, why would they ever want to do more good? Because as soon as they cure diseases forever, healthcare specialists would be out of a job. And it's like, yeah, so imagine that, but for everything else. Um, it's like it's an idea that's really close. It's just a little off. But yeah, there are examples people use. I think people use. I think examples people use would be something like pest control. There's like historical examples of like you need to, was it like snakes in India or something, or I don't know, but the idea is the same. Just that I need to get rid of a bunch of rats. So every time you bring me a rat tail or the head of a rat, something that proves that you killed a rat, I give you money. And then people see that, and instead of saying like, "Oh, well, I'll just get rid of rats," like, "Oh, we'll breed rats, and then we get a bunch of them, cut off the heads, and I show them to this guy, and he just gives me money." So as soon as it becomes like a profit incentive, then yeah, people can find ways around that instead of just solving the problem. But even then, the only reason why somebody needs to game that system to get more profit would be if they need money, right? So we can get angry about the person who comes up with the scam, but yeah, if you accounted for everybody's needs, housing, food, healthcare, all the same stuff again, you would hope that people would be less incentivized. If you got everything that you really want, why would you even need to come up with a scheme to breed a bunch of rats to just get a little extra bit of money? You already have your house, food, water, your family is cared for, right? Until you get into the specifics of like what luxuries a person cannot just get, then that's a deeper discussion about like, oh, I need money for that. But for the most part, like you would just focus, your people could then spend their time, money, and energy on things they actually cared about. And that's where we get discussions on like people could focus on the arts and stuff instead of having AI do that while we do all the menial labor or something. Games like Star Sector, yeah, I mean, it's like space simulation, but fully modeled, uh, supply and demand. It's in the games. There's plenty of tycoon games. Probably the bigger one where people just envision running a business. This tycoon games are the fun example where in the intro of most of those games, they already kind of, you have to suspend your disbelief because the tycoon games already usually start off with somebody, usually a relative, just kind of handing you the seed money or whatever capital, the foundations of the business. The tycoon games do not usually realistically show the kind of work that it would take to get started, and that's what goes into pop culture. Where I would criticize it, saying that yeah, the self determination about like, oh well, you just try hard, start your own business. So you would have to get like loans approved. You would have to work a normal job long enough to save up money to do that, um, to even get started. And even then, the tycoon games are of course balanced by whatever limited team and their ideas of economics. Um, that they can charge like ridiculous rates. They can just set the numbers to make profits match whatever they want a tycoon game to feel like, whether that would make sense or not. Set the profit margins because it's a digital game. You're just manipulating numbers until it feels right to you, but you're telling a story to a player who then, they may or may not disconnect it from reality. Say like, yeah, and that's totally unrealistic. Um, City builders. I love Against the Storm. I have a soft spot for some of these city builders. Um, Against the Storm and Frostpunk are some of my favorites. Against the Storm, probably the best for me, just because it gets past like SimCity, some of the other games that have more of the status quo problems. Um, and Against the Storm just straight up has old timey uh, centralized planning. I guess would be the word for it. Most games do, but a lot of them do. But it because it doesn't deal with like too much currency. A lot of it comes down to, do you have the resources to build something? Then you build it. So just in the real world, houses are made out of wood, concrete, stone, um, all of the things that go into it. I'm not a contractor, I'm not an architect, but the point being that you have the physical materials, and then suddenly at the end of it, you see like, that's worth that's worth $3 million. It's like, what? Depending on where you live, the supply and demand, and blah blah blah. So you get in that starts a discussion about like currency, but yeah, all this artificial financial value that's kind of thrown around. Um, Whether or not you can afford to do something when materials are there. We could just house people, but we just don't because for profit system and we're tied to the currency stuff. Um, then there's Frostpunk, which kind of ties into a little bit of status quo, so which is where it'll lead to, but a lot of it comes down to what I was saying above about um, I guess like what I was saying, like the end of the world sort of conflict. And so Frostpunk, I mean, it's in the name. It's about the end of the world by way of freezing. And so if everybody's going to die to the cold, you need to build a city. And in order to make it successful, you need to do that by any means necessary. And of course, it marketed itself as a city builder game where you have to make these tough choices depending on how you pick your ideology, and then whether you focus on like order or religion. I think were the main ones for Frostpunk. And so I mean, so the reason I bring that up though is that at least on normal difficulty, it was a somewhat fun individualized experience because it would subvert it. Because if you ran the city competently, you didn't on the standard difficulty, you did not have to do the horrible things and stuff. Like you don't have to resort to child labor, you don't have to cannibalize, you don't have to I think I would pretty regularly just you can just build games with almost pretty much nobody dying, except for like complete random chance. Um, Almost everybody can live, and you don't have to do heinous acts. So what this really does is just showcase whether if you put competent people in charge, you get rid of people who have the mindset that a better world isn't possible, and that because everything is save the world or die, right? Then they will do anything in the name of saving their people because they think that it's necessary. And again, it's the zero sum thing, right? In order for us to do good, to save society, something bad has to happen. No, the fact that you needed child labor to survive a game implies that you were just a bad leader and manage it, um, and stuff like that, right? So I thought that was funny because yeah, some people think it's necessary, just like Darkest Dungeon, where um, I did get pretty far, and I you don't have to rely on um, XCOM as well. There's a lot of these management style games that I personally like because it's fulfilling a power fantasy of good management potentially. Where imagine a boss that cares about the subordinates and doesn't just throw people into a meat grinder for no reason without like actual achievable goals or something, not out of like pride. Um, but just yeah, like you usually don't have to play like a boss who sacrifices people almost meaninglessly until it is absolutely necessary and you've tried almost everything else and the situation is like almost you yeah it you cannot solve it any other way. But for to have people immediately jump to and yeah, I gotta be the sacrificial kind of leader all the time just shows you that they probably weren't the best. So that's an ideology that you can kind of take out from this. That just that it is not always the end of the world, and people who will share that sometimes just use that to cover up their inadequacies. Um, Let me see. So yeah, so which gets into status quo. So if the idea of status quo, yes, and you probably wouldn't be here if you didn't know that what it is. It's just the idea that everything is okay the way things are, and there's a reason why everything is the way it is, and you can't really change that much. It's a little unrealistic, which is understandable to some degree, uh, but it's again, it could just mean that they're lazy and they're closed-minded. So, standard of living. So yeah, successful versus average versus failure. I kind of already talked about that with 40-year-old virgin, everything else, but of course that ties into socioeconomics, how wealthy you are. Um, because if you don't like own a home and you don't have, I think the model U.S. the American dream, it's like own a home in the suburbs that's you and your spouse with 2.5 kids, a dog, white picket fence, a lawn, like a car or two, yeah, with the dog or cat. It's so I mean there are standards, and for sure I don't want to take away anybody's happiness. There's room for luxury in our lives, but clearly there are limits where people say like, yeah, and I should also have a yacht and a private jet, and also I fly literally, I fly or take a car across the street and stuff like that instead of like walking. There's a level of excess everybody finds where that becomes like not realistic standard of living and is indicative of like a wasteful consumerist culture. So I feel like, of course, the U.S. is famous for how wasteful it is, and that you will again wonder, just like with billionaires, like if we solve that problem, how well we could be distributing things better to the rest of the world. I say this as somebody who's benefited from privilege, I'm sure. Um, I mean, again, this is some self awareness. The fact that I'm even able to make a YouTube video in some of my free time with my energy here instead of being cooped up, worn out from another day job, because I'm forced. Because the hardest you should be working is every job that you can get. I'd be working like 2 or 3 jobs and multiple shifts every single day, right? If I were in a poorer family and I didn't have the support of my family, I'd probably be doing that. And yeah, so even me being able to do this is already, even as somebody who's not successful on the internet, is still a privilege. And again, I wish more people had that sort of free time that I'm enjoying right now. Even though, yes, I still need to. I just finished moving. I'm gonna find a job, but that's personal life stuff. But yeah, there are people who work a lot harder, and the problem is again not to get stuck into suffering builds character, and that yeah, everybody should do that. It's that we could all be living a better life, but if we can't even talk about it, then how is that going to be possible? You just get people who are completely detached from politics because of this. They already assume like, well, yeah, but I got to take care of me and my own. Um, why are you talking about some wishy-washy dream ideology thing in a stupid notepad on a YouTube video. You think the YouTube video is going to change it? Like, well, if enough people see this, enough people see every other political video about video games and pop culture and see, like, yeah, why don't we demand better change? Where the pop culture is our bread and circuses to just change, to bread and circuses to avoid change. Because if you're, I mean, again, I'm guilty of this on some level. If you're happy enough to use these things as escapism to just say like that's all the energy that you have, um, that all that you have the time and energy for, understandably, then yeah, you're not as willing to finally pick up the torch and pitchfork and stuff like that to just to demand change and other things that would probably get you demonetized. I can't really endorse or suggest it, but I mean, yes, when things get worse, people will take drastic action, and it's just that the pop culture that we enjoy to numb that pain will still have aspects of all of this. Um, so yeah, status quo. Um, so then I think I noted this down because it is because I didn't want to list one example, but the funny part of it is standard of living. It pops up. It pops up in pop culture all the time. People poke fun at um, like out of touch directors or whoever has to come up with the sets for movies, because how many stories have you seen where the character is introduced as a failure, or oh, they're very poor, and their apartment or their house is still like really good, and the fact that they even own a house costing hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, possibly depending on where they live in the story, right? Anybody who lives in an area or knows what real estate and living conditions are like for, oh, this story set in New York or something, it's like people will immediately see that and say like, yeah, what, this guy's supposed to be a loser, uh, because the stories that out of touch, and they need to get past that the setup for like for even for the viewer accepting how does this person have the free time to go on some sort of wacky adventure and hijinks and stuff like that. Uh, so yeah, that's a little on standard of living in pop culture. So things like that, um, where like yeah, this level of wealth would not be attainable at all in the real world. That sort of a story disconnect. So status quo, revolutionary, anti-hero terrorism, V for Vendetta. So I already kind of covered that. That it's yeah, whenever you're fighting the status quo, it becomes pretty easy for you to just get called a terrorist, and you want to destroy their way of life. And like on some level, yeah, like I want you to have a better life. Whenever somebody criticizes America, like you deserve better universal healthcare. You don't have to fight for these. You should just get. You should. These are things that are given for citizens, and this is what you pay your taxes for. Your other countries just get those. Um, so yeah, you deserve better. But it's easy to just get labeled, like radical leftist, terrorist, and stuff like that. And so, um, yeah, if you're a revolutionary, you get instead of just being like an anti-hero about like I'm demanding change, and unfortunately, just talking about it didn't take us anywhere. And um, in the time it took to talk, more people suffered and died. Then you kind of eventually need to force that change. And you just get labeled as a terrorist for finally doing that drastic action. And V for Vendetta did a big one of that. I'll get into that for in a bit. Let me see. Control F. Yeah, yeah. Arcane is of course right there. Um, so, but yeah, I mean, V for Vendetta is a big one. So it's set in the UK, and it's like some alternate future. Apparently, it's based off of a web comic or something. I didn't really follow it, but yeah, I've watched some. I watch a lot of YouTube reactions to try to get a feel for how people interpret. It's like a conservative government and all that. Just that a lot of people are tired of it, and yeah, the violent actions that you take to overthrow an unjust government will look like terrorism. And unfortunately, I mean, in the U.S. we have that with like January Sixers. That's the unfortunate part of right wing ideologies, that some of it is understandable, and that in that they're just seeking change and trying to take care of themselves. They just go about it in the wrong way, and um, this is why it's people find it a little funny whenever you share a left wing ideology in the U.S. and you just don't call it socialism or communism. That even the right, a lot of right wingers would think that things like universal healthcare or something, progressive workers' rights would be very good and stuff. They just try to keep people away from like Red Scare propaganda, the scary words and stuff. You're already getting all. You would get this stuff for your taxes. You would address the elites and stuff. It's just the changing of who you think the elites are, the Illuminati, and those conspiracies. It's like, why do you need to come up with all of these uh, conspiracy theories about some hidden organization when in the news you have the rich and powerful influential businesses bragging openly about all of the things that they're doing, this record-breaking profits to screw people over through exploitation. They don't need to hide it with some sort of shadowy cabal. um, but I mean, so yeah, it's just it's yeah, the story is it's cool, it's very artistic, and um, story about people coming together, but and the revolutionary action, some despicable stuff too, trying to get. But I mean, it's yeah, violent. By the time it gets violent, things get ugly. Um, there's not usually a very pretty way you can just tie a bow on that. So yeah, status quo, punching up or down, rebelling with ideals and not just aesthetics. So I guess I did kind of get into that already with the right wing. Is that you could just the idea of rebelling. You want to you always people root for the underdog, and people again, even the bad ones. People think of themselves as the good guys, the main characters, and you just if you're in love with the idea of rebelling, then yeah, fighting authority just for the sake of it is kind of pointless. Because you should have an ideology. Um, right? Something you actually believe in. And then eventually, when that is put in place, then you're not fighting authority anymore because you're just doing the right thing. You're properly doing it. You wouldn't need to fight. Um, I don't think that's submitting and stuff like that, like emasculating yourself or whatever. It's like yeah, you're okay with it. It's consensual at that point, and as long as you know it's not propaganda. It's an always never ending fight to find out like what's truth and what's going on. Um, and I'm not saying that you should just mindlessly accept things, even what I'm saying right now. I fight back against the whole video. Um, but yeah, it's just obviously the context matters. Punching up and down, that's power dynamics, and this is where you would get into again right wing um, ideology versus left wing. There's a lot of like punching down at people low on the social status ladder. But like it's the fault of the poor people actually, and blah blah blah. And again, not that there are some things that individuals can do to be better, but for the most part, as I discussed above, uh, people in lower positions of power are just dealing with the status quo. Um, and so your criticism should really be aimed punching up at the people in power who usually implement the policies, shape the culture that leads to these situations that we find ourselves in. And so, yeah, you just want to do that so you don't just end up like crabs in a bucket, pulling each other down when you could be criticizing. Like, why aren't the people in power with wealth? They have all of the means of control and doing things. They don't do that because then you're just expecting it's mean testing again, right? Like you think the only people who can do something about it are the weak, but you just said yourself the strong are the ones that are capable. So you would think the most effective action would be done by those capable. Great power with great power comes great responsibility. Again, all that stuff. So, so yeah, status quo, non-violence versus systemic violence. Again, it's a more specific naming of the United Healthcare situation, right? This is the new Godwin's law or whatever. It's like instead of okay, well, we can all agree on Hitler, except we don't. That's the scary part nowadays. But okay, a lot of people agree can come to some agreement on the United Healthcare trolley problem. So It's like nonviolence. It's like preferred. It doesn't people. So there are people who just don't like conflict. So of course, but the nonviolence was every time people asked, like, "Hey, can we have healthcare?" And oh, well, the implicit agreement of health insurance and stuff is that I pay into this, and then you're gonna help me when the time comes. Um, and then of course that didn't work. Nonviolence, just asking nicely. And meanwhile, that same system, yeah, they're undergoing systemic violence. So when somebody signs the piece of paper, comes to some agreement, and tells the subordinates to do it, that person is not themselves shooting with a gun or stabbing with a knife, um, but that doesn't make them not responsible. Not responsible for what they've done, and it's just done with more degrees of separation, so that it's harder for you to assign the body count um, of the dead and the suffering that that person's done. And yeah, nonviolence, violence. You can get into an entire video about Gandhi and Martin Luther King about like trying to remain nonviolent, but they only respect that if they have a conscience and uh, and they don't really respect any of your nonviolence if they don't expect if they have no fear of escalation, if they just know, hey, yeah, they're always gonna just do this uh, hippy dippy talk no jutsu, yeah, they're only ever gonna just talk at us. And if they never do anything, then you don't have to budge. If they're comfortable with that, then yeah, then you truly will do nothing. But yeah, I mean, you get into the specifics of like strikes. You're doing economic violence. Maybe that's the only way that the rich and wealthy kind of care. Of course, there will be a lot of suffering. They can do economic warfare with recessions, and you still need to have a place to live. You need to have food for everybody involved. So you need money. So it's yeah, it's your the conditions of maintaining your siege by maintaining supplies for enough of the population is essentially economic warfare. Um, but yeah, nonviolence, but systemic violence. I included the line "You'd be no better than them." Um, is a fun one where I think there's some great tweets about like if you do violence against the person who did violence to you, you're no better than them. Sounds like the perfect propaganda that somebody in power and doing all the violence would spread, so that nobody ever rights the wrong and never fixes it. I mean, yeah, a lot. Again, this is where you get into pop culture, where artists, whoever writes the stories, need sponsors. They need funding, and if you're tied to big business, then you're incentivized to write flattering stories in which uh, the bad guy has been shifted, so that people don't focus on those on the subject matters that I've been discussing here. Um, so I mean, yeah, there are obviously a huge amount of this depends on context. Um, about like who's if you use violence as your go-to answer for everything, and the example that I go to is like whether you're able to rehabilitate and not engage in like fatal violent action depends on the context of like, okay, poor guy stealing because the system made it so that everybody's poor and it's hard to get food and stuff is very different from rich person who continues to steal from people despite him and his family living very comfortably, and they just do it because then you have less sympathy for them, right? Because something is done less out of desperation and more just because I was just following orders. I never thought to question this. You had so much power to change things, and you just don't. Yeah, then you lose sympathy from people. Um, so yeah, this is not to just say like, yeah, Martin Cusa, you bloodthirsty barbarian and stuff. I sure wish it didn't come to that, but clearly, uh, nonviolence it cannot be the only thing. Um, yeah, centrism, compromising values, tolerating the intolerant, try to please everybody, please nobody. Yeah, so I'm again living in the U.S., dealing with Democrats, Republicans, which is Republicans are like far right now, and then the Democrats are like center right, especially when it's compared to the rest of the world. But because of the U.S. duopoly, we think that Democrats are the left. A lot of normies, like I guess. And the Republicans are right, and then there are centrists who think, oh well, then because they're both so extreme, then the only realistic answer must be somewhere in the middle. So they just stay between right wing and center right, which means they're right wing. Oh, there's that's all the U.S. political commentary. Um, so yeah, I mean, I mentioned it earlier about the political candidates again, where you could give people an inspiring message, and instead you compromise on what you really want, and then you get into office, and then you still have to make compromises to realistically get things passed because you still accommodate those people you're fighting against right now because that's nonviolent. You wouldn't ever get rid of them, or right? In order to continue a functioning society, you have to reintegrate the toxic ideologies stuff. It kind of doesn't make sense. Um, the whole tolerating the intolerant thing, because yeah, a lot of right wing ideology with wanting to find like an in group that they stay with and finding an out group that they can blame their problems on as a scapegoat. Um, yeah, they're the intolerant ones who want to create like Asian hate crimes, or they just find a minority that they can blame things on. And so the counter argument then of like, oh, well, I'm not comfortable around somebody who's like a right winger hardcore. Like, why don't you tolerate them? Because their ideology is literally against me. If they did not believe that, then I'd be a little bit more willing to be around somebody. But if they believe that's the only way forward, then we are now incompatible. Our existences, um, yeah, I would not my the only reason why I would imagine a society without them is because they are imagining society without me. You don't That doesn't just come out of nowhere. They believe in the zero sum uh, mindset versus it's the meme was LGBTQ rights or economic stability. That little clip, I believe, if you search those words, you'll get the guy running a quiz or a survey, trying to get a feeling of like, oh yeah, yeah, I'll just sacrifice LGBTQ rights for economic stability. You don't. That's not a zero sum. You don't have to do that because your economic stability isn't based on uh, getting rid of LGBTQ rights. That's not an actual material condition for why it has to be that way. And that's just showing that yeah, people, the kind of person who would be able to sacrifice that right away means that yeah, as soon as it's something else, LGBTQ rights, then you throw another minority or economics, yeah, that minority or economic stability. Oh, and economic stability because we got to take care of the most people possible. You don't have to sacrifice those. So I mean, yeah, that's the sort of compromising of ideals. It's like, oh well, you got to please everybody. I think this will make the most people happy and stuff. If they've already talked themselves into that, it's their version of the trolley problem. If they think that those are the boundaries of the decision, right? Then, like, that's not true. You have to, you've already boxed yourself in. That's why I think one of my immediate counters to the trolley problem is like, depending on what the decision being offered is like, do you kill one person or do you kill five people? And stuff like that. It's like, well, okay, if you already know that you cannot stop the trolley any other way, um, right? Or you cannot free the people tied to the tracks, right? Those are all of the outer boundaries. Because sure, in a perfect world, you would just save everybody. But there are people who truly believe like there's nothing else you can do, uh, and stuff. So just like I said before with XCOM, Darkest Dungeon and stuff, there's a type of leader where like you do not sacrifice until absolutely necessary, and if it's like Frostpunk, like you don't turn to the horrible decision step one because you've already decided that the better world is not possible. So yeah, and yeah, pleasing everybody, pleasing nobody. We see that all the time. Um, so yeah, wish and power morals. So this kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about religion, faith, and all that, destiny. And I mean, yes, the wish and power morals tends to come in with things like Harry Potter. That's why I listed it down there. But yeah. So I mean, so this is what I was saying earlier with Brennan Lee Mulligan with Wired, when he talks about um, Harry Potter, but it could be in numerous other series in which there's something like the power of love saves the day, and the power of of trying really hard, and because the protagonist or somebody special really believed and they really this parent loved their child, they saved them. So the implication then that every other person who's lost somebody, um, they just didn't love their the people close to them is a huge insult and stuff. Instead of making this about their capabilities or some unique circumstance, and yes, some acknowledgement of luck that would have to go into your writing of your protagonist, instead of making it some sort of chosen one thing. Um, Wish and power, but I guess that is tied into that, but I guess by my examples, the wish and power morals does tie into more of the believing in a better world, and what I said about Invincible with and multiverses stuff, where what if you could just make things happen magically or whatever? You just poof, imagine something into existence, and so this gets into maybe cynicism of, oh well, no person can handle that much power and stuff. If you gave somebody a wish, they would use it greedily, and I feel like to believe, right, in order to believe that, you would already be cynical that the average person would instantly be greedy, instead of wishing for something that helps the collective of humanity, right? Just you would have to put yourself in those shoes and imagine somebody, imagine being there, and the only thing that somebody could come up with is like, I wish I had $1 billion. Instead of me, if I was writing a story and like Martin Q, you suddenly have the ability to make a wish. It's like, okay, it'd be the equivalent of the Miss Universe, Miss America. I wish for world peace. Super vague thing, but no, like actual systemic things where like I wish we could all have our needs taken care of, and that we weren't beholden to uh, the wealth inequality that takes advantage of what we want and need, stuff like that, and to change the status quo. And so yeah, there are stories like Aladdin, Puss in Boots and the Last Wish, um, where you have literal wishes. Plenty of stories in which there are wishes and you just can't possibly do it because the writer doesn't want to imagine a world in which they solved all the problems. They can only imagine a bad guy who does try to, in the story, take the wish for themselves, and so they end up getting rid of it, the means to do so. Like you have a literal magic genie and stuff like that in Aladdin, whatever limits of wishes and stuff like that is. Um, so yeah, it's obnoxious when writers kind of have to get themselves out of that corner they've written themselves into because they don't want to suggest we fixed everything. Um, it's fine. There's still beautiful animation in these stories, and yeah, Puss in Boots and the Last Wish, stuff about like appreciate what you have. I again go straight back to Billy Cabot's dying of cancer, about like, I think you're allowed to wish for a little bit better than what you have when things are so preventable, right? There are people dying of like rationing their medicine in the U.S., going for like GoFundmes, Kickstarter campaigns for their health. When again, in other countries, you just have universal health care and your taxes pay for it and stuff. So like, yeah, there are times where wishes are unrealistic. And you do need to tell people to appreciate what they have. But also, sometimes the things that they have don't need to be so bad. And you could appreciate things better if you had your basic needs cared for or something. And it just feels like an insult to everybody who wishes for something better to say, like, not, don't make it too lofty of a wish, though. So, I mean, that it's I still enjoy these stories. It's just that is something that will be in the back of your mind whenever a story comes up with like, wait, they could just fix things, and they don't. This is where we start getting into uh, other powers, Green Lantern, and then Gurren Lagann's down here. A little split. I know that there's like a death battle between Green Lantern and Gurren Lagann coming up, and I mean, that's fandoms colliding. whatever pop culture YouTubers trying to combine multiple fandoms into like a power scaling battle. Oh yeah, well my Superman would beat Goku, and my guy is super strong. Whatever. That's not really the point. Um, but yeah, there's I think the criticism of Green Lantern again. I'm not a fan. As in, I don't even know a lot about it. Just the basic idea of a guy who has a ring, aliens, and he just imagines things and they happen. But the criticism, of course, is that wait, so you're so unimaginative that if you're in a fight and you can create things with this magical ring or space magic ring, you just come up with like big fist with green magic and you just punch the guy and stuff instead of you could just solve problems with you were literally limited by your imagination and your willpower or some writing contrivance that makes it again that the writer does not have to come up with something that actually changes reality, um, and the fundamental systems or something. It's fine. It's fine to just enjoy it. Just that is something that I've seen plenty of Green Lantern fans, actual Green Lantern fans, probably infight about. Like, yeah, you could just this is a fault or something. Um, Religion, spirituality, ethics. Bruce and Evan Almighty. Yeah, similarly, this is why I said it. It ties in with religion, because there's plenty of pop culture stories in which, like, oh, what if I were God for a day? And the average person, and then could you handle that sort of responsibility? And again, these are movies that are written for an audience that, at least in the U.S., right? We have a huge there's a worldwide huge religious population, and you can't step on those beliefs. And about like, of well, wait, a God that is all powerful and all knowing, but they still allow bad things to happen. It's all part of the plan. And if a single human being then got those exact powers, they would be overwhelmed. But wait, no, if you were granted that, you're already omnipotent. You could just immediately change yourself to be able to process all of that, including that one scene where all the prayers going into uh, Bruce's mind are drowning him out because he can't hear he can't concentrate. You literally have godlike powers to change reality. You just change it so that you can understand that. That is the nature of reality. You just choose. But no, they got to make it seem scary to the average person, and so they can't do it. Oh no. And no person with godlike powers would ever do it for anything other than selfish reasons. So yeah, you could have used your powers just to immediately, um, solve world hunger or something, and it ends up just being a story about a person appreciating what they have and about working hard. So yeah, you could work hard with powers, which is actually kind of I think I forgot about mentioning this with self determination and the superpower up here is that um, it's why people criticize like Batman and stuff. Again, what he represents, and you can still enjoy it, but about like, oh yeah, every person can be Batman. He already has the real world superpower of being a billionaire, super rich guy with all of the technology and privileges that brings. So that's already kind of false. It's just only because he's dealing with literal superpowers and has no powers in exchange that makes it somewhat normalized, uh, that he can even stand there. And even that people find ridiculous of like Man of Steel or whatever. Like, yeah, a guy with no powers up against nearly godlike alien and stuff like that. So yeah, Batman gets used as propaganda all the time for like average person. You could be anything you want, and stuff. Um, so yeah, and then of course that's getting into this talks about like the superpower of having a lot of money, whether or not you can do that, and then the story ends up being like, oh well, actually, Batman does do a lot of good charitable stuff, and he tries to do things with his wealth and stuff like that. I'm sure in the story they write whatever they need to make you feel a little bit better. It's still wish fulfillment, power fantasy, and yeah, plenty of the wealthy in the real world are not doing good stuff with their wealth. You just end up sounding like a billionaire apologist every time you say like, my fictional billionaire is the good one though, and stuff like that. It's fine. Just acknowledge reality. Um, So yeah, whether or not you can handle all the power, I think that was the religion and stuff. Just appreciate. Oh well, yeah, right. That's what I was saying. Like whenever even MHA has this problem, right? About like, oh well, you have superpowers, but that doesn't matter as much as uh what you do with it and all the good stuff. And a lot of the stuff about it actually doesn't matter whether you have a superpower or not. Just be a good person, or oh, actually you could just make up the difference with technology, or you could just give this superhero a gun and stuff. And that problem always remains okay, but there's nothing really limiting you from using technology and having a superpower. You could have a superpower and use a gun, and never people tell you like, instead of yeah, why don't you just do that? There's nothing stopping a person with super speed from also now having a ranged attack with um, a super speed gun or whatever. And it's used as like a you can actually just work hard mentality again. Um, the fact that a lot of superpowers have to be balanced around guns just showcases how much uh, is just another way of highlighting gun violence and the insanity of like regulations when we barely can deal with this in the real world. That you have to imagine a bunch of supernatural abilities just to even it out. Say, oh, and then my guy can't get shot because yeah, all it would take to kill a superpowered being is like a sniper, and if you can't be on super speed defense, moving or blocking constantly, eventually you will die. You need to sleep or something, and it's just showcasing that the existing problems cannot be addressed by superpowers if you don't address the problems of like a person with a gun angry because no health care and starving people and stuff. It's just gonna be like it keeps coming back. It's just gonna be United Healthcare again and again. All right. So yeah, speaking of power fantasy, isekais. I mean that entire genre about like if you suddenly jump into another world from your reality. I mean, I think I'll get into it a little later with zombies, but yeah, it is essentially people seeking escapism from status quo. Where, from my understanding of the genre, just that yeah, if you're a loser in the real world and you just see no way out of it, and there's no way society's going to change within your lifetime, then yeah, that sort of wishful thinking brings you to okay, one day a portal appears and it teleports me somewhere else where suddenly it's a more of a blank slate and I have the chance to actually be somebody and stuff. And that's fine. Again, plenty of power fantasy. You can just enjoy that. Just know that that's where some of that comes from. To then have every other power fantasy of like, and then every woman is in love with my main character, and I use this main character as a stand-in for myself, and I can choose which of these smoking hot women of unrealistic beauty I can just pick, or maybe I'll be with them all. Um, so yeah, status quo, Barbie. I mean, that movie coming out recently, plenty of men and women's issues about with they're swapped around the Barbie world version of like representation and all that, right? About being Ken enough, where about a matriarchy and stuff like that. Just yeah, maybe one day the men will have as much power as women do in the real world. Just just deal with misogyny. Um, yeah, clearly still an issue, but I mean, yeah, the Barbie movie is a big one. Um, Arcane. So I know this one's kind of a big one, and actually about. Of course, it's still being a beautiful story, the art, and some of the effort. But I guess I gotta highlight this then. Yeah, the differences between season one and two, you could do. There are videos already detailing this, but it ties in pop culture. About like maybe somebody on the writing team before higher ups really got their hands on like, oh, what kind of story is this? Revolution, class warfare between a poor and then some rich city state or whatever, these two regions and in a city state. It sounds cool. Definitely want to not do that at the end though. So the revolutionary spirit between season one and then in season two, where it kind of just becomes this again, all unite against greater threat and Victor and the power. the hex core or whatever. It all so many of the tropes, right, of the above combined down here, where it's like, you have this great power and it becomes used selfishly, or well, if there's no one person can handle this power, and anything that is different, it's scary, and also hive minds, bad. Which I mean, yeah, everybody. It's always framed. This another pop culture trope about like hive minds, where then you lose individuality, independence, and freedom when you really just you could just portray it scary. And we already have social media. We have propaganda, which on some level is a hive mind of indoctrination. You've just been told whenever somebody gives you this input, you give this output of a canned response of what you've been taught. That seems like a hive mind to me. Whenever somebody says blank social program, that's socialism or communism, and that's bad, always bad, and stuff like that. What about criticizing the rich? No, the in freedom, democracy, and that's why we have to run the country like a business. Yeah, that seems like a cult, but it's never portrayed. It's almost never portrayed in pop culture the same way a commune is in like Arcane. Eventually, they just have to make it seem scary. Whatever. So yeah, the fact that they eventually band together to fight that, whatever, it's uplifting in a different way. And if you just want to focus on the relationships of the characters, fine. But yeah, Arcane is a big one where um, they end up having to go back to status quo, and it's just kind of assumed that yeah, instead of like a revolution where the poor people actually, the bourgeoisie, the rich of Piltover from Zon or whatever, they tone it down into like a blue-haired revolution and a little civil disobedience before finally uniting, and then yeah, like one person out of their 8, 9, 10 person council gets a seat. You get one poor person representation. Big wins, big revolution. It's yeah, and I mean this is like a French studio, so I mean yeah, these are the people who get riots and protest, burn down buildings and stuff, and so that's what happens with pop culture influence is that their some of their rebellions and civil disobedience compared to the U.S. is way more radical, and they still have troubles with it, and that's just how difficult it is, as opposed to the U.S. where it's you know what U.S. if whenever what is it the with Russia is the big one. Whenever somebody's like, oh yeah, if the Russians didn't agree with Putin, they would just overthrow Putin. But it's scary. Oh well, if they cared about freedom and democracy and doing the right thing, they would just do it. Meanwhile, in the U.S., Trump. So okay, if the average person knows that this is bad and they don't agree, then you would just overthrow him, right? You just do it. No, no, it's scary and police and actually blah blah blah. So yeah, it's so easy to just tell other people to do it, to make the move, to do the right thing, and then you just can't do it yourself. And now, oh well, we'll wait on the legal process, and then well, I guess we'll just give him another term, and yeah, we'll see. But it's just yeah, their status when things return to status quo, a lot of the dissatisfaction with like I didn't like this. I don't like if they people who cannot articulate the elements of why they are dissatisfied with the story, they probably on some level felt this where like it derailed itself from where it promised that it was going at the start, and then it just mellowed out into something else by the end. And that's probably what a lot of the pop culture examples on this list and elsewhere likely they likely had to deal with. Warcraft is one much closer to me. I played like a couple games of League of Legends and Toxics, whatever, but the story, whatever, okay, overlap between the game and the show. Warcraft is one I actually played, and so I mean, of course, the story there with like, I mean, the deeper story with like Warhammer, Warhammer 40K, Blizzard, all of the political business stuff there is a whole other deal. But yeah, just the story alone of, well, we need a story where there's a humanity and a bunch of allied races fighting against the orcs and the Horde, Warcraft, orcs, scary races and stuff, and fine fantasy fair. Um, Game and the movies, whatever. But the big criticism here with status quo is that, of course, when you have World of Warcraft, you're creating a game and you need that conflict. So again, this goes right back into the pop culture story criticisms of like, do you ever really have a resolution? Because they are incentivized to keep the conflict going so that players have a direction, and how you write the story of conflict. The factions must always be fighting, and if they ever achieve peace, then what? You're supposed to meld everything, and then you're actually going to have to change the world and maybe come up with something else. You can't just let somebody have a happy ever after sort of thing. So I mean, yeah, I never played World of Warcraft, but the idea of a never-ending war is kind of up there. Um, which we'll get into Warhammer 40k in the next area. X-Men, similar thing. I've never been like a super comic reader for them, but I know of the basics about, and you could take some parallels about minorities and stuff like that. Except at least here, you get superpowers sometimes, and some of them are really bad. Discrimination and blah blah blah. And yeah, like I don't know the exact specifics of how they write Xavier versus Magneto about like you can never trust, and then oh well, we just want people to accept us, and then see you get proven over and over that you can never trust. I don't know. I don't, but I know that there is conflict in there about the regulation of like superpowers and whether or not somebody's accepted. And again, the story writing is based around never finding a resolution because they are incentivized to never find a solution. But I mean, yes, if you still want to pick apart the series for like, oh well, I still like the idea of a story that deals with discrimination or something. Fine, you mean you'll get that from like even the David Cage games for all the other stupid writing and stuff. There are plenty of good things you can take from anything, even the worst of pop culture. Just I'm just spreading this here to say like you can demand better and at least be aware of the tropes. Harry Potter, I feel like I already went over this several times because of how popular it is. People list it as um, a series that they love. They'll reabsorb it. It's up there with the Lord of the Rings. Um, yeah, it's so I mean yeah, magic, status quo. You just can't solve problems. The problems of like protagonist syndrome and a conservative view of the world. I mean, we've seen J.K. Rowling go absolutely insane on social media, some of her viewpoints. It's the mold talking, right? It's just, yeah, I feel like I've talked that to death in the past. Holy fuck, it's been 3 hours. Okay, so now reality, optimism, pessimism. So yeah, this kind of gets into another delving of the universe creation. Um, this top section is more like yeah the overall outline, and then I start going down it. So yeah, so how you feel about reality versus optimism and pessimism, as I've kind of mentioned, it's right wing, left wing, whether or not you can imagine a better world without having to compromise or without needlessly sacrificing people in a zero sum game because that's the only way that you can imagine things going. That's a level of pessimism versus optimism. Um, so yeah, good fun examples like Bo Burnham, funny. I think yeah, taking a well-deserved mental health break, probably not coming back. But I mean, he's a fun musician with some insightful songs about various subject matters. But he does bring up like politics, sociopolitics, I guess. How the World Works is a fun little ditty that about like Sesame Street style music about how the world works and about suppressing beliefs, suppressing anything speaking out against it. Um, yeah, I mean, there's not much to spoil. It's literally just a couple minutes song, and it's just funny that he pretty much says like a lot of several problems with the way the world is, and um, that it could be easy to downplay anybody who brings it up as like you're a conspiracy theorist or you sound crazy when really I mean that passion that makes somebody sound hysterical is because they feel passionate about it. It literally is life and death. So I mean, of course, you would start to get more energetic about it, and it's just easy to write that off as hysteria with like a silly character like the sock puppet, and then you and then you end, yeah. Um, but yeah, there's that is optimism versus pessimism. You have to actually acknowledge how the world is versus saying something like everything is the way that it is, and that's just how it will always be. Um, Valkyria Chronicles, I bring this one in mostly for one example of how funny it is. It's anime politics, so I mean, it whatever snuck in through Japan and all that, some anti-imperial, anti-war things there. I never even got to play it, but I've seen some. The big thing is the example I like to use is uh, elements of pop culture and fantasy where they just change a couple of key, they swap key events around. So something like in Valkyria Chronicles, the Darksons, where oh yeah, here's a race of people who are racially discriminated against, treated differently because of the color of their hair. And I mean, in a world of an anime world with like people with all sorts of unnatural hair colors, pink and stuff, like be protagonist or whatever, fine. But people look to poke fun at how, oh well, that's stupid. And I say, and the which I love because then yeah, like oh yeah, it should make more sense to be racist against something like skin color, like in our world, right? It just does it. That's the example I love because yeah, it doesn't make sense, and that is an element of reality that you can critique with how ridiculous it sounds as soon as you swap into something else because we've been told what makes a real difference. Um, Reality, yeah. So this is plenty of other pop culture. Simpsons, Futurama, The Onion, South Park. These are some of many but these are some of the most prominent where these are the shows that get accused the most of like, oh well, they predicted this, and um, they're such biting satire and comedy. And clearly, as the real world becomes even more ridiculous, as things worsen, and solutions are not found, then it becomes harder to write satire, parody, because how do you poke fun at how absurd things are when things getting more absurd? Um, and as far as the whole future predictions and stuff that these shows uh, depict. I think I forget where I saw it, but somebody analyzing them is like, yeah, well, because the problems they're just criticizing social problems at the time and things that are relatively easy to predict if it wasn't happening right then. You can just extrapolate like, yeah, this is what's happening, and because they were never addressed, then of course episodes of these shows years, decades later, will still be true because you never solve the problem, and that's why it looks like they are predicting the future. Um, so I mean, yeah, that is another. Those are some key pop cultures. Metal Gear in the gaming sphere, obviously hyper political work, even though there are plenty of people who believe it isn't. Just like a bunch of bands, Rage Against the Machine and whatnot. But yeah, Hideo Kojima. I don't know if it's just him writing. I'm sure he has like military consultants and uh, other geopolitics he probably researches in his own time, if not brings in for the games. But yeah, similar with being prediction in interactive form about the military-industrial complex and geopolitics. I don't haven't played the games myself. I just know of the subject matter and that it is a very political game, and it's not just cool tactical shoot bang. Um, where people love the power fantasy of just being a Navy SEAL super special agent or something, right? Like it's politics in there. Um, Star Wars, Star Trek, again, another Star Wars is a very popular uh, series for people to attach themselves to, and I mean, and both Star Wars and Star Trek, right, have ideas about what kind of future we have, whether how you use technology and uh, how you deal with new species, new cultures as you explore. I know in Star Trek, I don't haven't watched enough of both, but I know that yeah, a lot of especially Star Wars comes under criticism with maybe writing quality, and I don't know enough about that. But I mean, again, I attribute a lot of this to the same things I said about these. Just that if there are problems with the politics of and the writing of Star Wars, it's probably some uh, a conflict between the zeitgeist, I guess, the feelings of the population and what's acceptable, Overton window, um, that are with things that were from attached to the series from the beginning. So again, this is what George Lucas is problematic with some of his stupid midichlorian writing bullshit. Word of the director stuff doesn't always mean for the better. But midichlorians in Star Wars would be a great example of like something that was um, portrayed as like, oh, this is mystical part of the universe, and it's something that you could just work at to gain this connection, and then you turn it into force powers or something, and then it just became like, oh well, no, it's midichlorians which are in your blood or something, and that again, that is a direct example of something that seems like, oh well, it's like a spiritual connection that anybody could have if they tried hard enough, and then you suddenly close it off with no, actually it's determined at birth, and either you have it or you don't, and the midichlorian, the higher the count or something, maybe you have a better connection to the force or something. It's yeah, it suddenly becomes less about hard work, more about blood. I mean, if they want to criticize that, if they at least acknowledge that, oh hey, it looks like no matter how hard you are working at a disadvantage with as opposed to somebody who just was given this thing. If you're willing to criticize it, that has a place in the story. It's just so I mean, and then there's right, and there's the entire rebellion versus the Empire is quite literally right there in the names. I think George Lucas is on record about the Ewoks or something about like that jungle war on Endor or whatever about like the Empire representing the U.S. and the Viet Cong being the rebellion. And high Vietnamese person here. I not gonna do an entire video about the Vietnam War and stuff, but I mean yes, more capitalism versus communism. Uh, the the education that indoctrinates people into supporting the military-industrial complex and the wars, and we're always on the good guys doing the right thing to spread freedom and democracy. Um, Throughout all of history. Yep, that's definitely what happened. So I mean, not going to get into that, but I mean, yes, that those are the literal politics of Star Wars, and people who think that oh yeah, we're the sides of the rebels, we're the underdogs, and the Empire's the bad guys, and they don't realize that yeah, as Americans with the military-industrial complex, you are being the Empire right now, and flirting with fascism right now, and they just don't the disappointment with the fandoms about like, do you even hold power accountable? The kind of people that you say that you would stand up against in a series like Star Wars or something, and you're just not. So I mean, fine, but yeah, that's a popular one. Um, then you get into some that I really like. So the Matrix, uh, things like the Matrix, the Truman Show, and are some that I like about questioning the nature of reality. And I mean, as I said before, the problem is when you can keep questioning no matter what, and that could be something like vaccines. All of them are bad, and they're going to cause autism, and that's why I distrust blah blah blah. You just fight forever about like there's a time and a place for like, hey, I don't know about this whole like medical treatment by using leeches in the Middle Ages, and it's like, oh, but those are the medical professionals of the time, and that's where I actually kind of understand people who are mistrustful because there were times where some of the accepted methods maybe looked more normal, and you only realize, oh, we know better now that we were wrong back then. And then the people fighting against medical science now with COVID, anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, and all this stuff, they if they believe that they are the ones speaking up against leeches or some bullshit, they think that they're going to be in the right side many years from now or something, and it's sometimes like that's not the case. That's the problem with rebellion for rebellion's sake, is that it's good to question, but how do you know when when to submit and say like, okay, well, these people probably know better than me, and this is not some sort of stupid thing we're going to be laughed at later. Um, but I mean, yeah. So the Matrix questioning reality. I mean, of course, the Wachowski sisters, I think, would later talk about how on some subconscious level it was about like trans rights, the pill, whether you choose reality or you keep lying to yourself, masking over it. Um, but I mean, of course, for the greater audience who doesn't delve that deep and doesn't who don't personally in the trans community or anything, the obvious one would be like AI and technology. So like, oh, as humanity relies on AI, eventually they will take control and destroy us or something. And I mean, sure, on some level, I think we're seeing that it's more about being afraid of the people who misuse AI, and that's just capitalism again. The rich and the powerful utilizing algorithms to uh, cheat us out of our lives, more so than the AI suddenly gaining sentience and deciding to kill all humans. Um, which the people who side with that and just say, "Oh well, I'm going to be nicer to my toaster," so that when the robot uprising happens, they'll be nicer to me because I was nice to them. Like, fine, that's a cutesy thing you can do if you don't seriously believe that's the biggest problem with technology and stuff. It's just capitalists using technology and productivity to choke us out of existence. Um, so yeah, I mean, just yeah, questioning of reality and personal discovery what you believe is real or possible. I mean, yeah, the whole thing about the Matrix mind power. Again, I don't like. Okay. Oops. Oh wait. Sorry, moved over tabs there. A bunch of these. So so yeah, I mean, there's stuff that borders on the whole mindfulness, and like if you just believe hard enough, like it's fine. It's some mysticism in the story, but if you're just trying to teach people to believe in themselves enough or something. But that's not my main point here. But that's what some of the Matrix is about. Warhammer 40k, the entire grimdark uh, setting. So that ties in with what I said about like Frostpunk and uh, some of these games where some of these settings where like things are bad, things are really really bad, and so in order for humanity to survive, these are the horrible things that we must do. Kill all Xenos. It's literally xenophobic. It's in the description of their universe and stuff, and it's like, oh well, because yeah, these things kill billions of humans, and so you must hate all other species, and then it humanity first. There are several things like this. That's why I kind of tied this together. Warhammer, D&D, Freerin, Helldivers 2, the military-industrial complex. Like there are elements. I think Starship Troopers, right, would be there about yeah, things that are stories that are where that is portrayed as necessary because that's the only thing that you can do. But it was a story literally written so that those things would be necessary just because some guy because rule of cool, and I do agree a lot of the like Warhammer 40k and stuff is cool. um but yes, that's why there's a surprise gathering of like neo-Nazi fascists within those fandoms, and they will regularly use imagery from these series. um and before you see the cool image, and then you see them post an opinion on your ethnicity or your community or something, and some of the worst uh, horrific psychotic things you've ever heard when you're applying it again to the real world, the way that they view things in this fictional series. um, so yeah, like you can support this thing if you just want a cool story to get into, but yeah, as soon as people really take those and apply it to minorities, to white supremacy. I know Games Workshop has had to do some statements, at least one, about like we do not tolerate this within the community. But I mean, there's like literally the what Black Templars, there's Crusades, the Christian, nationalist Christian religious imagery, the maybe kind of Nazi adjacent German crosses and stuff. It's the Gothic stylization. It's unfortunate that those things are somewhat claimed by some of these ideologies, such that it's hard to separate them. I think an example is like is it like a Buddhist symbol and the Nazi swastika, but it's like in the reverse, or it flipped around or something. It's like, okay, I guess you can. It's not that you can never use those again in other contexts. It's just that you can't be surprised then that people will now jump to the assumption that it's intended to be the reason that it's used almost everywhere else nowadays. Yeah, we were totally talking about Buddhism. That's why I used that symbol. Uh-huh. So I mean, yeah, I still enjoy it, but I mean, gotta know where some of the ideology comes from. I talked a little bit earlier about D&D, right? The progressive versus regressive, I guess, ideology of like, oh well, you just need a race of things that are evil so that your players don't feel bad just killing them because they're supposed to. And then Freeran, obviously anime story, and there's the traditional conservative, I don't know, whatever the background of the Freeran writer is, as beautiful as some of the other aspects are about, more about some of the D&D, the tropes of like elves and their lifespans and how would you connect with somebody. It's like, oh well, that's beautiful and personable. And then out of nowhere, the demon storylines about like, okay, well, we're gonna write them to be intelligent, but also they're just inherently evil, and then um, irredeemable, and actually they're about whether or not some aspect of it is about like social etiquette, and that it just so happens to cross over into killing, and that's why they are completely irredeemable, and they have no capacity for anything else except that they're intelligent enough in every other way. But I gotta write them to be disliked, and it's fine, whatever, right? This is right up there with again Starship Troopers, and he gets into Helldivers about like when the can of worms here is that whenever a story needs to write an irredeemable species, it's easy enough to substitute that for a minority or something, and just say like, yeah, you just substitute a minority you don't like into that faction, and say like, oh yeah, um, they have no social etiquette. They're gonna kill you first chance they get. They're inherently evil and bad, um, and that's why it's okay to kill them. And they'll always be able to hide behind the pop culture by saying like, oh, but they're not literally. I did not literally draw a minority doing that. It's a demon, or it's a space bug and stuff, as a dog whistle to attract other people of that mindset. Say like, see, we're socially accepted enough to have this in our stories, and I can find like-minded individuals and stuff. And of course, the problem is when it crosses over into satire, and that's where you get Starship Troopers. I don't know the exact breakdown. I'm not doing a full video on that about like the original Starship Troopers book, the writer, whether or not it's like, oh, this is literally about endorsing fascism, or no, you're supposed to. It's poking fun at nationalism and how ridiculous and over the top and easily acceptable it would be to fall into fascism or something. And then the movie gets made by somebody else who is taking it to another extreme beyond the author. And now you have a game like Helldivers 2, and plenty of other, Call of Duty, of course, plenty of military propaganda games where it's poking fun at over the top nationalism and humanity first, kill every other species that are not us, um, and all that. And the amount of people who play along with it until you actually ask them, like, no, but seriously, do you actually believe that? What do you think about like other people of other nationalities or ethnicities? And yeah, it's them damn immigrants, and you got to kill them all because they're. It's like, yeah, in that case, that they literally have taken the bugs of the fiction and they just substituted a real person. And that's dehumanization. It makes it easier for you to kill them when the time comes. If you don't view them as human anymore. Um, so I mean, yeah, the problem's there, but And yeah, Call of Duty, of course, plenty of storylines about U.S. specific special ops and CIA or whatever. Like we did good stuff. I mean, military. It's if you're just in it for rule of cool, and really, I haven't played Helldivers 2. I just know the memes, some of the memes, and it's fun. And there's a real sense of camaraderie. I mean, of course, with your squad, just um, that the community gets together, and it would almost be like communism. That the community bands together for these greater purposes and what are these greater movements within the game's kind of meta strategy layer that the developers use to keep things fresh. So I mean, yeah, there's plenty of good stuff there when you know that it's like satire, but haha, but we don't actually believe in uh, this kind of xenophobia, racism, and fascism, and then like, oh well, the robots are literally socialist, communists, and they're actually the bad guys, and whatever about the story about um, like humanity actually causing its own problems in Helldivers with like the bugs are fuel or something, and then they somehow get to other planets, and but they're really just being spread so that humanity has a fuel source from them, and then it gives you a reason to conscript people. And I mean, yeah, I mean, this is where like America uses the carrot on a stick of the GI Bill and getting an education with tuition and stuff, maybe getting a house, right? All a job after the military. Those are carrots on the stick, and we can still say that we have a volunteer military. It's like you're volunteering so you can get things that should just be part of your standard of living. That people in other countries will just take care of citizens. It should not be, uh, the exchange for your service and stuff. You're already getting taxed and stuff. So then here we have Gurren Lagann, Gurren Lagann. I vary on pronunciation, whatever. But I mean, so yeah, it's Japanese anime. It's got some traditional possible toxic masculinity things, but it's you could view it that way, and it's still meant to be like inspiring, whatever. But I think it still comes off mostly inspirational. Acknowledge the realities of the problematic stuff from the time. A lot of fan service, but the main thing about like this is as close as I will get to spirituality and using a strong belief in what's right and setting your goal that high and not backing down on it. That's some of the most inspiring um, stuff I've ever seen. I think this would among anime fandoms. I believe I don't. It's not. It's clearly kind of niche, but I know it would get used a lot for like the indomitable human spirit sort of motivational videos and just yeah. If you haven't seen it, spoiler talks. I don't know. Just it's it's really great. There's some incredible, touching, close human moments. It's not just about like mecha because that's just the vehicle, pun not intended. Um, the vehicle for moving the story along about your beliefs and just doing things. It could literally have been about anything else. Similar to what I'm going to probably get into with the apocalypse stuff, right? It's like how in zombie fiction the zombies are not supposed to be the thing because it's just a conflict and it's about people and how they respond in times of conflict, and that's all the zombies are really supposed to do aside from getting rid of the status quo, like a fresh slate. Um, so yeah, in the same sense, Gurren Lagann has a ton about the human spirit, humanity as a whole, and how you deal with your close relationships and how you move forward in life. How do you believe in yourself, coming of age, and stuff like that. It just happens to be cool, rule of cool, mecha robot fighting. Um, so yeah, direct politics. So I mean, I did kind of already get into that with Persona 5 and mentioned like where you actually have deal with a politician, but I mean literal politics instead of like figurative stand-ins and stuff like that. Again, we have Call of Duty. There's military sim FPSs. Yeah, Small Soldiers, Team America, World Police, Star Wars with Empire, Rebellion, and stuff like that. Those are some of these are you list like real places, the real kind of American gung ho nationalism versus usually versus yeah like other countries, people who didn't do anything. Except that when they do things, it's in retaliation because if America kills your family and you get angry about that and you fight back, we'll call you a terrorist. That sort of thing. It's like, well, yeah, they wouldn't have done that if you hadn't done something to them. We get into the whole Last of Us, Israel, Palestine sort of thing. It's like, yeah, horrific things are done because you did something horrible to the people they love, and the cycle. But yeah, so obviously a lot of there's propaganda there, but there's satire. Team America, obviously the South Park guys, um, and Small Soldiers. Fun one where it's the little action figures that get implanted with military chips or whatever fiction you want. It's fine. It's fun, and yeah, you army of like GI Joe soldiers fighting against these peace-loving monsters. They look monstrous, but they're the peaceful ones in the story. And yeah, it's you're supposed to root against an army of of military dudes, and yeah, all the military sim stuff. Again, if you just enjoy them as games, if you just want the sense of camaraderie, it's fine. But on some level, as long as people are aware of things like what's America's Army or whatever, some of the games are just meant are if they're designed to bring in young people, propagandize them to join the military and stuff like that. Just be aware of that. That's all. Disco Elysium, obviously one of the most political video games I've ever seen. I don't know enough. If I were making a living off of this, I'd probably do better research. But yeah, probably the most political video game, and stuff like that. Like deep themes about that humanity, what kind of person you are, how you react to this. Uh, there is ups and downs of it being like a fictional world because of course then you get to pick the one-to-one ratios of like, oh, this represents this in the real world. They use a different word, and it's their version of a nationality of this slur or something like that, and it's for the most part somewhat similar. But again, because it's not a real world, it's fantasy. There are aspects of like spiritual or magic, just a different kind of universe that again makes the whole religion argument of like, so yeah, supernatural things, are they happening? That means that your belief system is a little different, and then when magic, that throws a wrench in your some of your beliefs, and things that don't work in the real world versus would you hold that ideology if magic and supernatural stuff was actually happening? That's all. But I mean, yeah, a lot of good discussion in the game. Uh, Many influencers coming to grips with like what kind of person they would be or what kind of person they want to satirize if they pick something that they wouldn't believe. Um, it does get pretty close with actual political terms. Full Metal Alchemist. I mean, I brought this one up because again, clearly Israel versus Palestine, actual genocide, politics stuff, and plenty of shows in which, yeah, there's some sort of like horrific thing done to motivate. I mean, yeah, having your people massacred and stuff that's a strong motivator, and so part of people's tragic backstories. And yeah, there are some really good episodes. I don't know enough about like I'm gonna research in depth exactly what the writer did to prepare for this episode and stuff. It's just yeah, they use um I think what like the main characters, it's like a kind of a German stand-in. Is Japan and Germany's relationship historically has been a little, it's been some weird stuff to get into with the world wars. But I mean, yeah, it's then they showcase a Middle Eastern uh, territory and people, a war that kills a lot of them, and the kind of resentment that you would have if that were done to you, whether it's done for resources and then it's magic, whatever anime bullshit. But I mean, the same kind of motivations, or it's just power. instead of oil, oil is power too. And yeah, so I mean, there are shows like this. I just use this because this is like a very popular one, and I'm sure people who get to those episodes while also criticizing things that the U.S. In particular, but many countries, the goings on of the Middle East, and saying, "Oh yeah, it's so complicated and definitely more complicated than I can handle." But I mean, the idea that it's you know the West historically, oh yeah, we're the good guys again. It's uh, distancing yourself from that indoctrination, essentially. Um, so yeah, and then lastly, I got into the apocalypse, kind of trailing off here because I was getting tired of adding to the list. I mean, this is almost 4 hours, so I mean, this is what pop culture does. But yeah, apocalypse. I guess it works as the bookend to the other side of this because this is a continuation of the isekai. It's like what if you just wanted to get away from the status quo? If you're either transported into another world or it's the end of society as you know it, and you're just tired of things never happening and this dragging out of problems forever, then what if it all just came to a sudden end? So, I mean, yeah, that's where Apocalypse. There's some power fantasy in the fact that you just get to, right? It's usually portrayed as like suddenly you can loot, you can just steal, and because nobody's around, it doesn't belong to anybody. You're not dealing with morals of ownership. It's just, you know, uh, survival of the fittest. You can just take, and then there eventually equalizes some uh, social commentary on like the kind of people who would rise to power, the communities that you form after the fact, to make sense of the world again, whether civilization tries to reform, and then what people do to each other when faced with some sort of lingering conflict from the apocalypse. Sometimes, um, whether it's zombies or some other thing. And yeah, that's where you get into things like The Last of Us, Fallout, and just the zombies in general. It's like you could zombies. It could be a stand-in for aliens. It could be anything. It's just what is the conflict that makes it so that people will decide like when to sacrifice somebody, or zombies get used a lot because when a zombie bites you, you eventually turn into a zombie, and you can use that as social commentary, right? For whether somebody becomes too far gone. So I mean, politically, right? Just imagine you're progressive, and suddenly your best friend says some of the most right-wing neo-Nazi thing ever. Like, uh-oh, was that a joke? Do you actually believe that? And if that turns into an argument or a conversation where you cannot bring them back, they have been zombified, right? You cannot cure them. They have become the other, and they're now out to kill you, right? Like indirectly. If I'm an Asian person, and if I were friends with somebody who said like, "Yeah, COVID, it's like the China virus, and all those damn Asians, they just give you that China virus." Like, well, one, I'm not even Chinese, Vietnamese, but even if that were true, like you're just gonna kill all Chinese or all Asian people that you see because you think they're gonna get you sick or what? It's like you have to know whether they are now uh, no longer able to be rehabilitated, and that's where yeah, zombies tends to be a stand-in for no longer for somebody who's lost, and that can be a family member, right, a loved one. I mean, we see that happen. That's social commentary of like they're no longer that's not your mom anymore. You gotta kill her, and the problem is, of course, just like how a lot of the bad guys see themselves as good guys, a lot of right wing nut jobs will see themselves as the survivors, and all of the brainwashed leftists, the socialists and communists, they're the ones who are now mindless zombies, and we got to kill them. And I mean, that's where we're at. Yeah, Fallout is similar in some politics about clearly the aesthetic, Cold War, America, propaganda, um, fun, rule of cool with the old timey technology, but and of course like there's lingering Red Scare stuff. So I mean, kind of already covered that, but that's where you get into like people who love Fallout because of the aesthetic, and this is what I talked about before, like ideology versus aesthetic, somewhere up there. But yeah, it's like versus you actually hear about writing, and you don't just use um, the most popular imagery and you expect that that makes the game good. So once again, talking about like arcade and all this stuff, like if you're dissatisfied with a series and some of the problems, it's like, oh well, just because they took the wrong thing and what people were drawn to, good writing and some of the sociopolitics, in addition to yes, good game mechanics and other stuff. But if you mellow all that out and you dilute it, try to please everybody, you please very relatively few people. Um, don't know why I went up in reverse order, but yeah. So revert The Last of Us. I mean, again, you have protagonists, you have antagonists. Depending on the perspective of the people that you see, main character syndrome, you see the others wronging you, and you would move heaven and earth to protect the ones you love. You'd kill everybody on the planet for the ones that you love. But if anybody else loves anybody else, then they're among the people that you kill, which would imply if they love them the same way that you love your friends and family, then they would be justified to kill you to protect the ones they love. But you wouldn't let that happen. So you get into this cyclical criticism of violence, but whatever. I know that there's some stuff with it's like Neil Druckmann. I guess it's like Zionism, Israel, Palestine drama, which like I get if that's some of the intent behind it, but it's just like zombies that it if everything is usable by the right wing saying like we're the good guys in this story and they're the bad guys. It's like so yeah, I mean in that sense I will still use The Last of Us as a story of like it'd be really easy um, to say kill everybody else just for your ideology without helping people understand what you believe in, and if you're siding on something like your friends and family, I would sacrifice the entire world, the greater good, really, just for me and my personal beliefs. Then you literally see what's happening with um, health, the being able to mask during COVID. It's not even we're not even asking they weren't even asking people to sacrifice your loved ones um, to maintain the health of the world. They just wouldn't. There are people who wouldn't even mask. They wouldn't even socially distance. Um, right? You're not even criticizing a poor healthcare system that made it get as bad as it did, and stuff like that. And so, yeah, let alone the trolley problems of like sacrificing a daughter that you love to save the remnants of humanity to grant immunity, potentially because people are arguing about whether actually that's a plot hole or they wouldn't have been able to do that. So unless the word of God tells us, and then Neil Druckmann or whoever says that actually it would have, but yeah, it's you're just arguing over like the little exceptions when the point of the story we're seeing it nowadays health and what people do to each other in the apocalypse. Okay, it has been almost 4 hours. This is crazy, but I mean, yeah, this is how you would analyze pop culture, right? And I'm sure this would be like a crazy podcast episode or something, but just so, but yeah, the biggest thing here are some of these core beliefs on people, humanity, how we organize society, right? Like not just greater good, like in the I think Hot Fuzz is probably one of the most quoted for that. The greater good. It's just some sort of like cult thing, but I think but legitimately society would not work if everybody were incentivized to only take care of themselves. Then what's the point of all of us collaborating with each other to help each other with the best of our skills, to help a lot of people and stuff? You just would want to be you want to just I think people will naturally help people, and we're going to keep seeing things like this repeat in pop culture, celebrity culture, all the current events. Every time something happens, I'm able to usually look at some element of these ideological beliefs, and that's where I usually just read a headline or read an article say like capitalism. Yeah, that's the thing that's made worse by individualist culture, capitalism, profit-seeking company incentivizing anti-workers, capitalism. There, so yeah, that's. I don't know if I'm just preaching to the choir. The only kind of person who would care about this would already be somewhat educated and informed. and everybody else would just call me a nut and some sort of idiot who can't get to the point in 4 hours. Um, but yeah, keep enjoying stuff. Obviously, things are bad, and you need things like pop culture to take your mind off of it. But that's how it all comes together, right? It's almost never just the story by itself, and there's no meaning, no politics involved. Just the good old neutral days of nothing meaning anything apparently, except what it literally is. This is Martin Q, the Strategic Retreat. Clearly, deal how I'm venting about my problems and all this, but hopefully you guys are okay too. Take care.